Chapter 552. Your Majesty, I have indeed seen a yellow brocade robe in Jocheong Hall. However, I don't understand why the robe in the package was replaced with beef jerky. Please investigate further, Your Majesty. At this point, Elder Wu knew that there was no turning back for him. He might as well accuse Beligaju, Your Majesty. The sounds of soldiers and horses outside were still ringing out. At such a critical moment, the third prince had been standing in the hall without any intention of sending out troops to stop them. The evidence that this old official had found with great difficulty had been replaced by these snacks by some unknown person. Your Majesty, with all these matters laid out before us, I'm sure you have an idea of what's going on. The Emperor pressed his left hand on the armrest of the throne and did not speak. However, when he looked at Beligaju, his suspicion did not disappear at all. The tone of Bailey Jiaju's voice was particularly slow. Elder Wu's ability to turn the tables is really profound. You said that your men saw a yellow brocade robe in Jocheong Hall, huh? Elder Wu, do you need me to remind you that the Elder Compound is in the west of the city while Jocheong Hall is in a corner of the palace? How did your men see through Jocheong Hall through so many palaces? Upon hearing that, everyone turned to look at Elder Wu. Elder Wu's face turned pale and he wanted to explain. Bailey Jiaju interrupted him coldly, how dare you plant your own spy in the prince's bedroom? Elder Wu, you're really bold. How dare you put your men around me? Don't forget where you are now, this is the palace. Or is it that Elder Wu is not afraid of the royal family's authority and the country's laws at all? You can put your men around whoever you want. What about the emperor and the retired emperor? Did you plant your own men there too? The emperor narrowed his eyes. When he looked at Elder Wu, he suppressed his aura. Elder Wu shouted, I'm innocent. As a senior official of 3 generations, I know what to do and what not to do. I only got the news about the yellow robe in Jocheong Hall by chance. I didn't mean to pry into it. Even if I had 100 guts, I wouldn't dare to interfere with the royal family's affairs. The royal family is so concerned because of this news, Your Majesty. Ju, I'll give you one last chance. The emperor walked over and fixed his gaze on the black package. He said in a deep voice, tell me, what was originally in this package? Beligaju raised his eyebrows coldly, Father, it's irrelevant to ask me these questions. Why don't you ask Elder Wu, what is the punishment for framing a prince for a rebellion? Royal family. Elder Wu cried out loudly, as if he expected better from His Highness. His Majesty was kind enough to give you a chance, but your Highness did not cherish it. Why would I frame you? This is the truth. Otherwise, Your Highness, how are you going to explain why you didn't send troops to defend against the rebels outside the palace? Beligaju raised his head and looked at Elder Wu with his calm eyes. Then, his thin lips curled into a unique smile. Although the corners of his lips were curled up elegantly, it gave people an endless sense of coldness. Who said that I didn't defend against the rebels outside the palace? What did he mean by that? Elder Wu's body froze. His heart skipped a beat and his legs started to give way. Impossible. This is absolutely impossible. He had been standing in Chaoyang Hall since the beginning. How could he mobilize the troops? But, for some reason, he still felt a deep sense of unease. Elder Wu had just lowered his eyes. Then, a loud bang sounded from outside. It was as if something had exploded. Even though he was standing in the hall, he could see the smoke rising to the sky. Elder Wu turned his head around abruptly, but before he could say anything, he was interrupted. Pang! The second loud bang pierced through the sky. Bailey Jiaju stood in the midst of the smoke and confusion, with a smile on his face. All the brilliance was reflected in his eyes, like a broken diamond, so sharp that it could almost cut through people's hearts. Report. The leader of the Imperial Army rushed in and knelt on one knee. He cupped his fists and said, "Your Majesty, reinforcements have arrived. The reinforcements have surrounded all the rebels. The rebels have nowhere else to go. It's only a matter of time before they die." "Is there really reinforcements?" Elder Wu's eyes widened. His body trembled and his lips turned extremely pale. "No, I can't panic. Besides, there's nothing to panic about. Since the third prince has sent troops, I'll use the second plan. Although it was not as successful as the first plan, it could still kill Baligaju." The rebellion in the palace was suppressed. The emperor finally heaved a sigh of relief, but at the same time, he felt conflicted. He raised his eyebrows and asked, "Where did the reinforcements come from?" "I don't know." The leader of the Imperial Army hesitated. He looked at Baligaju and said, "But from the looks of it, they should be here for the royal family's sake." The emperor frowned. "What do you mean by, for the royal family? Don't you know what kind of military flag the reinforcements are flying?" This official. The leader of the Imperial Army did not know how to explain it to the emperor. The reinforcements were very efficient. They were like a gust of wind. Wherever they went, they would fight. There were not many of them, and each of them was carrying a strange weapon. They could fight against more than a dozen of them with just one hit. The most important thing was that they did not have a military flag. So, until now, he did not know where the reinforcements came from. Elder Wu seized the opportunity and said, "Your Majesty, you won't be able to get anything out of Chief Zhang. The closest army to the palace is your city-guarding army. Chief Zhang said that the reinforcements are here for the royal family's sake." This is the first time I've heard that a prince has the right to mobilize the city-guarding army before he ascends the throne. The more this old official looks at the third prince's matter, the more alarmed this old official is. Even the city guards are under his control. Presumably, this old official does not need to say much, but Your Majesty can see through the situation. Should I say that the third prince gave himself away in order to protect himself? Elder Wu turned his head and looked into Baligaju's eyes. "Royal family, how did you get the city-guarding army to work for you? Shouldn't you explain it clearly?" Nangong Lai finally understood Elder Wu's insidiousness. Whether a Jew sent the reinforcements or not, Elder Wu would have an explanation for this rebellion. The city-guarding army was a reserve army that only the emperor had the right to mobilize. Even the retired emperor could not touch it. Not to mention a prince with a sensitive identity. Once the city-guarding army was mobilized, the prince would be finished. Oh. Chapter 553. Why isn't the royal family saying anything? Elder Wu pressed on. "Do you not know how to explain?" Bailey Jia Ju lowered his head. His hair covered his pair of long and narrow eyes, faintly emitting a cold light. Elder Wu saw him like this and thought that he had nothing to say. He was about to say something. Then, a loud bang was heard. The door of Chaoyang Hall was kicked open. The person was carrying something that looked like a long black pipe. Her legs were long and slender, and she had a smile on her face. Her skin was fair and beautiful. Who else could it be other than Hellion Vivian? The corners of her mouth were half-curled as she leaned against the side of the door, standing not far away from Bailey Jia Ju. Her eyes were filled with mockery as she said, "Elder Wu, who told you that we are the city guards?" You. Elder Wu did not expect Hellion Vivian to come back in this way. He thought that she had returned to Juchong Palace because she was not feeling well. Hellion Vivian put her finger between her lips. Her action was very handsome, and a loud whistle was heard. More than 10 black figures landed one after another. Their actions were uniform, but each had their own unique characteristics. Their figures were all 1 in 100. Some were muscular, some were handsome, and some had smiles on their faces. Their arms and wrists were wrapped in white bandages, and each of them was holding machine guns and sniper cannons. Their aura was extraordinary, and there was a strong murderous aura in their cool manner. The leader of the Imperial Guards exclaimed and pointed at those people, "Your Majesty, it's them. It's these 20 people who blocked the rebel army's escape route." Just 20 or so people were able to stop the ferocious rebel army. This was impossible, right? How did they do it? Everyone could not help but look at that row of people with indescribable interest in their eyes. "All right." Hellion Vivian walked to Beligaju's side and smiled at Elder Wu. Her posture was indescribably domineering. "Tell Elder Wu and the Emperor who you are." "Yes." They replied in unison, shaking the entire morning sun whole. "We are from the Hellion Residence, the hidden army that protects the country." "What? The hidden army?" Elder Wu took a heavy step back. It was as if someone had poured a bucket of cold water on him, drenching him from head to toe. He was extremely cold. Everyone stood up with a boom, their eyes filled with shock. There was no one present who did not know about the legend of the hidden army. How many people had dreamt of seeing the most valiant army in the history of the War Dragon Empire? However, following the passing of Old Master Hellion, the hidden army seemed to have disappeared as well. Some time ago, someone said that Hellion Vivian had been recognized by the hidden army. However, they couldn't help but have doubts in their hearts. After all, they hadn't seen it before. Since they hadn't seen it before, everything was just a rumor. But now, the hidden army had really appeared. "Your Majesty." Hellion Vivian's thin lips curled. "In this case, you have no reason to suspect the royal family." He didn't use any city guards, but ordered the hidden army to guard the palace and protect your safety. After all, with so many eminent monks entering the palace, it was inevitable that someone would take this opportunity to create trouble. Unfortunately, Your Majesty didn't trust His Highness, nor did you trust me. You allowed Elder Wu to slander you. It was inevitable that our actions were slow, which gave the rebel army a chance to breathe. Your Majesty is so righteous, you won't blame us for being late to rescue you, right? Hellion Weiwei's words made the Emperor feel as if he was choking. Every word was like a slap to his face. However, he couldn't lose his temper. Because there was no emperor who would flare up at a person who had done meritorious deeds in front of everyone. Not only would he be despised by everyone, but it would also be recorded in the history books. He couldn't let himself be branded as a fatuous ruler. Therefore, even if the emperor's face was not looking good, he could only endure it. He gripped the handle of the chair tightly and forced a generous smile on his face. "Eunuch Gao." "Yes, Your Majesty." Eunuch Gao could no longer understand the emperor's temper. He shuddered when he heard the emperor's voice. The emperor looked at Hellion Vivian and tightened his grip. "Pass down my order. The third princess consort is meritorious in rescuing the emperor. She will be rewarded handsomely." "Yes, Your Majesty." Eunuch Gao lowered his eyes and retreated. Hellion Vivian smiled. "Your Majesty, don't be in a hurry to reward me. Elder Wu's crime of slandering the prince has not been punished yet." Hearing this, the smile on the emperor's face completely disappeared. He looked at Hellion Vivian without saying a word, but he was obviously displeased. As smart as Hellion Vivian was, how could she not know how much her attitude had offended the emperor? However, this was her temper. She was very protective of her children. As a father, he couldn't wait for his son to be labeled as a traitor so that he could protect his throne and reputation. A father like him didn't deserve to be a human. Beligaju probably felt that her little face was too cynical. He reached out to pull her back and said in a low voice, "Vivian." Hellion Vivian glanced at him and comforted him. "Don't worry, I'm here." No one can bully you. He wanted to say that he would take care of the rest. If he did it, he would make others feel worse than death. However, His Highness was shameless. He was very good at following Helene Vivian's words. His tone was a little softer, as if he was sighing, "I've never been favored since I was young. I'm used to things like today. It's just that I feel a little sad. Can you accompany me for a drink tonight?" "Okay." Helene Vivian naturally agreed. Not to mention drinking wine, she could even brew wine for His Highness. But don't feel too bad. Our Queen Wei Wei had always been weak when it came to comforting people. She could only let His Highness hold her and lean on her with most of his strength. Her shoulders were still trembling. Helene Vivian thought that he was feeling very bad, so she stiffened and comforted him. However, she didn't know that His Highness was already grinning from ear to ear. His expression was very cunning. Nangong Lai was close to the two of them. Naturally, he saw the whole process clearly. The corner of his mouth was twitching from the beginning to the end. Even if they were brothers who grew up together, he couldn't help but say something. Ju is really shameless. So, this Elder Wu must be out of his mind. Of all people, why did he have to frame Ju? His worries disappeared and Nangong Lai returned to his usual demonic charm. He waved his white feathered fan and looked at Elder Wu, who was already stiff. Beligaju also looked up at this moment. His gaze was as calm as water and even had a wicked smile. However, it made Elder Wu feel like he was better off dead. It's over. This time, even the Emperor wouldn't be able to protect him. Chapter 554. How dare you? The Emperor was still maintaining the bearing of a king, but after he uttered those two words, he started coughing violently. It was not because of anything else, but because the person standing in front of him was Beligaju. That was the son that he had always been afraid of. He only looked at him without saying a word. But it reminded the Emperor of 7 years ago, when Bailey Jiaju was not yet an adult. He had just survived a big fire and stood in the depths of the eerie palace. His left eye was wrapped in gauze as he looked at the Emperor. He looked down at him with a murderous aura. He could not imagine that was the gaze of a child. That was why he could not get close to this child. Because no one knew better than him the viciousness and cruelty in his third son's bones. Such a person would sooner or later usurp his throne. The Emperor narrowed his eyes, but he had no choice but to swallow his anger. He knew better than anyone else that this son of his was not to be trifled with. It was because he understood that he had the intention to get rid of him. However, to get rid of him, this was not the right time to do so. There were rebels on the outside and ministers on the inside. This was not a good time at all. The Emperor lowered his eyes and glanced at Elder Wu, who had lost his soul. He waved his sleeve and said, "Elder Wu, you're on your own now." He did not seem to want to listen to Elder Wu anymore because no matter what he said, it was no doubt a reminder to him that his dignity as a king was severely damaged this time. What's next? After all, Eunuch Gao had been the Emperor's servant for many years. He could guess the Emperor's intention accurately and knew how to give the Emperor a way out. The Emperor strode forward and said, "Everything will be dealt with by the third prince." He then disappeared in front of the palace door, leaving only a trace of anger. However, that bit of anger did not affect Bailey Jiaju at all. He slowly turned the silver ring in his hand and slowly walked towards Elder Wu. Thump! Elder Wu could no longer withstand the chill that gushed out from the bottom of his heart. He fell to his knees on the ground, sweating profusely while his hands trembled violently. However, he still could not understand how he had lost. As if he had seen through his thoughts, Bailey Jiaju reached out his hand and grabbed his collar. Then, he lifted him up and said in a low voice that only the two of them could hear, do you think it's so easy to open the door of the palace? You. How could he know? No. He clearly knew about it, so why did he allow them to attack the palace? Why? Why is this happening? He could have stopped them from the very beginning. Bailey Jiaju curved his thin lips into a smile. Why? You made a move against so many eminent monks in an attempt to snatch away my most beloved prey, only to be defeated. How can such a small lesson be enough? Also, Your Majesty. Your Majesty, what does this have to do with you? Elder Wu was getting more and more confused. He could not understand what benefits this person would gain by making such a big fuss. Beligaju looked up indifferently. It doesn't matter. I just wanted to teach him a lesson as the emperor. Otherwise, do you think you could have barged into the palace with your abilities? The one you really want to deal with is. Elder Wu's eyes gradually widened. However, before he could finish his sentence, his chest churned and he vomited blood out of anger. How could he accept this? Everything that he had planned so meticulously was merely a chess piece that the other party had used to attack him. Speaking of which, I have to thank Elder Wu. His Highness had always been a black-bellied person. His thin lips curled up. If it wasn't for Elder Wu, I would have to consider the rules and reputation even if I wanted to teach my father a lesson. Although I don't care what the world says about me, someone does. I don't want to be a demon whose hands are stained with blood in that person's eyes. This way, it can't be better. With Elder Wu's cooperation, those who deserve to be taught a lesson will be taught a lesson and those who deserve to die will be torn into pieces. However, I would like to tell you one thing, Elder Wu. After so long, I have never seen anyone as foolish as you. You. Elder Wu pointed at Beligaju with a trembling finger. He looked like he was about to die from a heart attack. Beligaju straightened his body. He was as noble and sharp as a blade. Take him away. It was just 3 simple words, but it carried the aura of commanding the world. The shadow guard replied, yes. Elder Jean, who had been watching from the sidelines for a long time, finally regained his senses. He watched helplessly as his colleague was dragged away. His heart was filled with intense fear, and until now, he couldn't say a single word. Elder Jean started to feel lucky that he only agreed to Elder Wu's suggestion and did not participate in it. If he had participated, then the consequences, Elder Jean did not dare to continue thinking. He lowered his eyes and wanted to hide himself in the crowd. However, what made his fingers stop was that Beligaju actually walked to his side and stopped. He did not know if it was intentional or not. At that moment, Elder Jean's scalp went numb. However, Beligaju only smiled evilly and walked past him. Elder Jean. Was His Highness deliberately scaring him just now? Ah. Don't play with people like this. Hellion Vivian turned around. Her delicate face was filled with curiosity. What did you say to Elder Wu just now? Why is he so angry? Nothing much. Beligaju pulled her over and put her beside him. I just kindly gave him some advice on how to play chess. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. You're teaching him chess at this time? He asked me. Beligaju's expression was very innocent. Did Elder Wu have such good taste? Hellion Vivian was very suspicious. However, the matter was resolved satisfactorily. She did not need to use the thing in her hand anymore. She lowered her head and passed the sniper rifle to little Seven, who was holding a bean bun in his mouth. The little one caught it with ease, turned around, and aimed the sniper cannon at Nangong Lai, who had snatched his red bean bun. Nangong Lai's originally charming smile froze. He immediately jumped up. Hey! Little Seven, what are you doing? You can't just point that thing at someone. Damn. You're really going to hit him. Aw Jew, hurry up and stop him. This crazy foodie. No one could stop the little seventh prince from having fun chasing after Nangong Lai with his long spear. The little one was particularly ferocious when it came to fighting. Even if a group of eunuchs followed behind him, it was useless. Since ancient times, the little seventh prince only listened to the royal family. Chapter 555. Little Seven, watch how you hit him. Don't damage the palace. Belikaju's voice was heard faintly. Hearing this, Nangong Lai shouted, Aw Jew, are you kidding me? He's hitting me now, not the palace. Don't teach your child like that. Sooner or later, he'll become a naughty child. Hearing this, Belikaju looked up. Little Seven, he snatched the red bean bun that third aunt made for me. The little one stopped what he was doing and turned around. He pouted and complained with his cheeks puffed up. Belikaju looked at the dumbfounded Nangong Lai and said, hit him slowly, don't kill him. Let him pay for your red bean bun. All right. The little one nodded solemnly. He turned his head around and continued to fight. Hellion Wei Wei watched from the side with great interest as the onlookers enjoyed the show. Seeing that the crisis in Chaoyang Hall had been resolved, Belikaju brought a few shadow guards to interrogate Elder Wu personally. He wanted to ask who was the mastermind behind this conspiracy. However, after he left, Elder Ming, who was hiding in the dark, stuck out his scarlet tongue and licked his thin lips. Hellion Vivian shifted her legs and looked behind her. Xiao Bai raised his eyebrows. Wei Wei, what's wrong? Nothing. Hellion Vivian said, but when she walked back to her bedroom, she was twice as alert as usual. The chanting of the eminent monks had stopped earlier. After Hellion Vivian walked out of Chaoyang Hall, the entire palace was unusually quiet. Hellion Vivian slowed down her footsteps. Although there were not many guards on this road, she would always meet many palace maids and eunuchs. However, why were there so few people on this road today? Could it be because of the palace coup that Elder Wu started? No. Something was still not quite right. Just as Hellion Wei Wei was about to stop, a row of palace maids suddenly appeared in front of her. The palace maids' walking posture was a little strange. They were not as respectful as usual and appeared to be somewhat sluggish. Even when they took a step, they were very sluggish, as if they were puppets being led by someone. Their whole body exuded a strange aura. Hellion Vivian narrowed her eyes, her fingers subconsciously pressed on the dagger at her waist. The palace maids walked over slowly, not even turning their heads. However, every one of them was dripping wet, as if they had just been fished out of the water. They lowered their heads and let their hair down. When they saw Hellion Vivian, they did not greet her, as if she was not in front of them. But Hellion Wei Wei couldn't pretend that they didn't exist, because all of this was too horrifying. A sound came from the side of his ear. Hellion Wei Wei looked in the direction of the sound and saw that every palace maid's feet were tied with iron chains. The chains were so black that they could not be seen clearly if one was not close enough. Just looking at them would make one feel uncomfortable. The reason why they were in a row was because of the iron chains in the middle. Since when was there such a punishment in the palace? Moreover, why was there no eunuch leading them to receive the punishment? Hellion Vivian furrowed her brows the more she thought about it. She wanted to take a closer look, but she felt dizzy, followed by drowsiness. A fair and well-defined hand reached out and caught her limp body. His white sleeve was filled with the fragrance of medicine. He smiled gently and looked at Hellion Vivian's face with gentleness. You're very vigilant, I have to do it myself. Master, this subordinate. Elder Ming did not have the posture he had in front of others. His hands were on the ground, and his scarlet eyes looked at the man who appeared in front of him. The man was dressed in a white robe. His handsome face was as white as jade, rare in the world. However, he had been ill since young, so it was inevitable that he would cough when he spoke. It's not your fault. Her ability has always been very strong. If it was not because of the change in the palace, even I would not be able to get close to her. Now, we only need to wait until midnight. Yes, Master. Elder Ming respectfully bowed his head and lowered his eyes. Hellion Vivian, who was in deep sleep, was still in the previous scene. She walked forward in a daze. Don't go any further. Yuan Ming's voice came from the Xuanhuan space, with a rare sense of urgency. Hellion Vivian's eyes shook, as if they were clear. Yuan Ming, why are you so agitated? I'm agitated. Yuan Ming's eyes were serious. Look at what's in front of you first. Hellion Vivian heard this and lowered her head. Even if she was calm, it was inevitable that she would be shocked by the scene in front of her. It was a deep black river. What grew in it was not water plants, but corpses. Even her surroundings were pitch black. Other than the weak light, she could not see anything else. Further ahead was an endless mandara flower. When the wind blew, it was red and intoxicating. She could faintly hear the clanging sound. It was a kind of flirtatious beauty. Red vegetation was not something that could be seen everywhere. But the mandara flower here had spread to the entire river. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows and turned around. Only then did she see a tombstone. There were only 2 words engraved on the tombstone. It was very messy, but it was full of killing intent. The underworld. The underworld. What's going on? Even if she did not read many books, she knew what kind of place the underworld was. Wasn't that the legendary hell, the place where thousands of ghosts gathered? Why was she here? Yuan Ming's eyes darkened. Someone set up a barrier in the palace and used the resentment of the palace to bring you in. The palace maids you saw just now were the ones who died in the palace before. They were used to lead the way. It turned out that the other party did not want to use the eminent monk to take your soul. Instead, he wanted to use the underworld to achieve the method of soul exchange. The soul-sucking spell was just the beginning. This method is really good. While everyone's attention was on the palace rebellion, he made a move. You said so much. How can we get out? Hellion Vivian pulled the iron chain next to her and restored her usual shrewdness. If you can come in, you should be able to go out. With your ability as the devil's messenger, this method should not be difficult for you. Yuan Ming's voice was low. It is not difficult for me, but we have to make sure that the next person has no other movement. According to my speculation, he should be using the 7 stars soul guidance array. This array needs to wait until midnight to completely exchange your soul. Now we still have time. However, as far as the current situation is concerned, the success rate is very small. Why? Hellion Vivian's eyes narrowed. Yuan Ming's face had a bloodthirsty look. Not everyone can use the 7 stars soul guidance array. Logically speaking, this array was lost 100 years ago. Now that it has reappeared in the world, this person must be the best of the exorcising tribe. Since such a person set up the array, it will not be discovered. At that time, no one will extinguish his soul exchange lamp. Even if we can safely get out of here, you will not be able to return to your physical body. Oh. Chapter 556. When Hellion Vivian heard this, her fingers froze for a moment. She had a premonition that she would leave that body one day. When the Hellion Vivian in her dream asked her to return the body again and again, she had a faint uneasiness in her heart. But she had never thought that all of this would happen so quickly. She had just promised Beligaju that she would accompany him for a drink. She had never thought that she would be in hell in the blink of an eye. Hellion Vivian looked around and said in a firm and cold voice, "No matter what, let's get out of here first." She had never liked to break an appointment with someone. Moreover, what she didn't want to see the most was that person's disappointment. Because he was too strong. Living in the darkness, he had always been expressionless. There was calculation in his eyes. Even when he was angry, he would only smile elegantly and evilly. He always made people feel that he was indestructible. But Hellion Vivian knew that he would also be unhappy. When he was unhappy, he would always smile very hard. For example, when he was suspected and plotted against by his biological father in the main hall today, so she had to get out of here no matter what. Wei Wei, you must remember, if someone asks you to drink soup later, you must not drink it. If you go to the wrong place, turn around and walk with your back turned. Yuan Ming lowered his voice and reminded her, the most important thing is not to let people find out that you are a living creature. Hellion Wei Wei nodded and turned sideways to pass through a door. What entered her sight was Oxhead and Horseface leading groups of people toward the arch bridge. That bridge was made of stone. It looked very ordinary, but compared to the human world, it was abnormally dark. The people walking on the bridge were all wearing long robes. There were no chains on their hands and feet, but there was no expression on their faces. They were like wandering ghosts, all of them were expressionless. At the beginning of the bridge, there was a person dressed like an old woman with her back bent. She was holding a bowl in her hand. She couldn't see what she looked like, but she was carrying bowls of soup. It's Meng Pao. Yuan Ming lowered his eyes slightly, don't go there. If someone sees you, they will make you drink soup to cross the bridge. Once you cross the bridge and enter the reincarnation path, you can't really go back. From now on, avoid their eyes and walk to your right. There should be a judgment hall there. On the first floor of the judgment hall, there is an exit to the human world. Hellion Vivian followed Yuan Ming's instructions and tried her best to hide in the dark. This was easy for her. It was not because of anything else, but because the undead in hell all had their eyes fixed in front of them and would not shift their gazes. This gave Hellion Vivian a very good opportunity to dodge. The ones he really had to be wary of were the Oxhead and Horseface. Their eyes had never been idle from the beginning to the end. Their eyes were flowing with a demonic red as they looked around. They didn't forget to talk and chatter. No one knew what they were talking about. They're speaking in ghost language. Yuan Ming listened carefully. The person who wants to take your soul used a formation to blur the boundary between the underworld and the human world. This has unknowingly increased their workload by a lot. Hellion Vivian retracted her gaze and said in a faint tone, it shouldn't be that simple. They seem to be very irritable. Alright, other than blurring the boundaries, that person seems to want to open the gates of hell and release all the heinous ghosts in the 18 levels of hell. Yuan Ming smiled evilly, it's really a bold and interesting idea. What's more interesting is that there's your help in this. Hellion Vivian's shapely eyebrows slightly raised, my help. The exorcism seal that was branded in the divine land can only be undone by the blood of the exorcism successor, which is your blood. Yuan Ming's tone was still evil, don't underestimate your blood. If you use it well, you can really knock open the gates of hell. Hellion Vivian narrowed her eyes, it's my own will. I don't want to encounter ghosts while walking up there. It's very clear that your own will is not important. Yuan Ming floated 2 steps forward and almost collided with an Oxhead who was escorting a vengeful spirit. Fortunately, Hellion Wei Wei's speed was fast enough and she pulled him back. That Oxhead was not easy to fool. He turned around and looked into the dark cave. The human and demon hiding in the dark held their breaths. That bull's head moved its strange pair of eyes and slowly approached them. What's wrong? Standing beside him, Horseface reached out to stop him. Oxhead did not say anything. He pulled out his blade and stabbed in Hellion Vivian's direction twice, but there was no effect. Only then did he reply gloomily, nothing, I thought someone came in. Who dares to barge into the underworld? Horseface smiled disapprovingly. Oxhead licked his lips. If someone really did come in, they can be our dinner. Stop dreaming and continue working. Today, the little king of hell has a belly full of anger. If we don't send these vengeful spirits back to their original positions, you and I will not have a good time. Horseface threw down this sentence and left with the chains. Oxhead was still hesitating. He circled around the dark cave once more before leaving. It was only then that Hellion Wei Wei walked out and resumed her normal breathing. According to Yuan Ming, Oxhead and Horseface did not have any effect on humans. However, when it came to spirits, regardless of whether they were living or dead, once they met their eyes, they would involuntarily follow them. This was also why Oxhead and Horseface were in charge of capturing souls when people were about to die. They finally passed through this dangerous situation without any danger. When they walked to the far right, the bridge of helplessness was no longer there. Their vision became clearer and clearer. The stone walls were lit with torches, and their shadows were cast on the ground, somewhat drifting. That's the first trial hole. However, it's still a bit difficult to get there. It was unknown if it was because they were in hell, but even Yuan Ming's voice was a little shaky. Hellion Vivian nimbly stuck to the wall and stuck her head out. Her eyes sized up a huge creature not far away. From afar, that huge creature looked like a ferocious-looking large dog, like a Tibetan Mastiff. Hellion Vivian loved canines the most, but she could not bring herself to love this one. This was because it had two heads, each with a different expression and slightly exposed fangs. They had eyes as red as magma, hair like tides, and a pungent smell similar to sulfuric acid. This is the legendary hellhound. Hellion Vivian narrowed her eyes. Yuan Ming glanced back and said with some surprise, "How did you know?" "It was written in the books that they are the guardians of hell. They will appear at night and eat the corpses that have just been buried. If a living person sees them, they will mysteriously die the next day." Hellion Vivian's lips curled up. I never thought that such a creature would actually exist. Chapter 557. Yuan Ming looked into the distance. Behind it is the passageway to the human world. You need to subdue it first. You need to be as quiet as possible so that you don't alarm the person who raised it. The person who raised it really needs to consider the aesthetics of the person who raised it. Hellion Vivian also had a pet in the modern world. The one that followed her was a purebred Tibetan Mastiff. However, the one in her family was much more handsome than this one. At the very least, it wouldn't drool while sleeping. However, this was also the most difficult thing for Hellion Vivian to overcome. The two-headed dog meant that they wouldn't give her any chance to slip past. Because even if one of them was sleeping, the other would be awake. Yuan Ming of course knew the difficulty of this. His tone carried a hint of playfulness. "Woman, what do you plan to do this time? You can't sneak away." "If I can't sneak away, I'll face it head-on." Hellion Vivian smiled. "Have you ever heard of the story of dual personality?" Yuan Ming was still puzzled when he saw her take a step forward. She walked past the stone wall and stood in front of the two-headed dog without any fear. Almost instantly, the awake dog head immediately turned around. Its scarlet eyes stared at Hellion Vivian and let out a low growl. "What a fragrant smell. It's been a long time since I smelled such a fragrant smell." As it spoke, it walked towards Hellion Vivian. The other dog head that was sleeping soundly opened its eyes. "Hey, what are you doing? Don't you know I'm sleeping? There's a human here. She smells delicious." "Human?" The sleeping dog head also stood up. It looked at Hellion Vivian with shining eyes. It looked like it hadn't eaten meat in 800 years. "Doesn't she smell great? We'll split it in half." The other dog head was somewhat impatient. At this moment, Helian Wei Wei laughed. Do you really want to split it in half? Then the one that eats my upper body is lucky. My upper body has more meat. I'll eat the upper body. The two dog heads spoke at the same time. After saying that, they looked at each other with an imposing manner. I was the one who found her, so I should be the one to eat her first. You can eat first and leave the upper half of your body for me. The two dog heads finally met. Their eyes met, and sparks flew. Helian Vivian smiled quietly. She wanted to take advantage of this opportunity to go around. However, she did not expect that at this moment, a frivolous voice sounded from behind her. That voice still sounded a little immature, but there was an indescribable coldness in it. First dog, second dog, you guys are really stupid. You don't even know that you've been tricked. Helian Vivian turned around and looked at the intersection of light and shadow. It was a 5-year-old boy with delicate features. Helian Vivian had seen so many children, but she had never seen one like him. He was so delicate that one look and she knew that this guy would definitely grow up to be a troublemaker. The main reason was that he now exuded the aura of, I want to woo all the beauties in the world. He had a pacifier in his mouth, a string of bones around his neck, and a huge axe in his hand. The axe was much bigger than him, but he carried it on his shoulder without any sense of awkwardness. He looked at Helian Wei Wei, narrowed his eyes, bent his nose, and sniffed around. Suddenly, he smiled viciously and said, interesting, a living creature that still has the scent of a human. No wonder first dog and second dog are so greedy. Are you going to feed yourself to them, or do you want me to beat you into oblivion? Helian Vivian was a pedophile. She couldn't bear to see such a cool little boy. She didn't care what he said and directly carried him up. She ruffled his black hair and said, why do you have a pair of bat wings on your back? Those are not bat wings. The little boy was furious. Oh. He took a deep breath and said, you, put me down first. Helian Vivian let go of him. The little boy immediately took out a small mirror from his clothes and looked left and right. Then, he sighed and said, fortunately, I'm not messed up. I'm still as handsome as ever. Helian Vivian's mouth twitched twice. Were children nowadays so narcissistic? Hey, you! The little boy leaned on the two-headed dog and crossed his legs. How did you get in? Helian Vivian said calmly, it said that someone set up a formation. I was tricked into coming in. Formation. The little boy's amber eyes narrowed. He looked at her and suddenly smiled. So, you're the descendant of the exorcist tribe. But if I'm not wrong, you're obviously from the 21st century. How did you appear in ancient times? Hearing the last sentence, Helian Vivian suddenly raised her eyes. Then she returned to her usual roguish self. This question, I also want to ask you, the law enforcers of the underworld. Why did you let me go to ancient times? Well. The little boy rubbed his chin with his fingers. I'll have to investigate this carefully to see if there's a mistake somewhere. Helian Vivian smiled and said, no need, I think ancient times are pretty good. Is that so? The little boy smiled again, full of bloodthirst. I haven't agreed to let you go yet. Why did you choose where you want to go? Even if you're the descendant of the exorcist tribe, you should pay a price for teasing my first dog and second dog. Helian Vivian raised her eyebrows. I thought that a handsome person like you should be very friendly. What did you just say? The little boy's eyes lit up. Helian Vivian said slowly, should be very friendly. No. The first sentence. The little boy's face was serious. Helian Vivian's mouth twitched again. I thought that a handsome person like you, good taste. The little boy took out the small mirror that he always carried with him and looked at his face. It's very tiring to be woken up by my own handsomeness every day. Helian Vivian chuckled. You're really too much, a little boy. you haven't even grown hair yet, how can you talk about being handsome? Why do you think Little Hook doesn't like such a handsome second-generation yen like me? The little boy squatted down and began to pluck the dog's hair. His face was full of sadness, he couldn't be more dispirited. The two-headed dog was already crying because of his abuse. It was angry but didn't dare to say anything, its eyes were filled with tears. They were really in pain. Hellion Vivian asked, "Who is Little Hook? Which flower girl made him miss her so much?" "My good brother." When the little boy talked about his beloved, his face was full of smiles, "He's also a human." Hellion Vivian's forehead twitched, "So the person you like is a boy." Chapter 558. How can you fall in love with someone of a different gender? The little boy said confidently, he just doesn't want to face his own feelings. Sigh, he's really a troublesome little demon. Hellion Vivian. I think you're the one who's annoying. How old are you? How old are you? How old are you? Feelings. Who is it that has such a strong ability to resist pressure and not be scared away by you? Well, since you have such good taste, I'll make things easy for you. The little boy pointed at the two-headed dog that was still breathing and said, "If you can defeat Big Dog and Second Dog, I'll pretend that I didn't see you today and send you back to the human world. If you lose, you can just stay here. If you can't even defeat Big Dog and Second Dog, you won't be able to deal with that person up there. You'll just die if you go back. I'll have to receive you again." Hellion Vivian calmed down and said faintly, "Okay. Then let's start." The little boy's smile was evil no matter how one looked at it. When the two-headed hellhound heard that it could eat people, it became energetic again. It raised its big claws and scratched at Hellion Vivian. Hellion Vivian's eyes narrowed and her whole body stood upright in the air. The breeze formed an invisible airflow around her. However, such a barrier was nothing to the two-headed hellhound. It opened its mouth and a raging fire rushed straight to the bone. Hellion Vivian's figure flashed and a layer of light appeared in her eyes. She began to use the wind to rotate back and forth between the left and right sides. Her movements were so fast that even her shadow couldn't be seen, let alone attack. Left. Right. The two dog heads rushed to the left and right based on their instincts. In the end, they ran with all their might, causing them to feel pain in their balls. The tearing sensation made the two-headed hellhound cry out in pain. The two heads collided with each other and fell to the ground dizzily. How could they be convinced? They scratched their claws and prepared to attack again. Don't you feel ashamed? The little boy raised his axe and reached out to hold their heads. His eyes looked at Hellion Vivian again. You're quite smart. You know how to take advantage of the weaknesses of Big Hound and Second Hound. Hellion Vivian retracted her martial chi. I also have a dog. No matter how big a canine is, it's a little silly by nature. In her opinion, this two-headed dog was like a husky, extremely silly. Since you've won, I'll keep my promise and send you up. The little boy smiled evilly. However, it's really hard to say whether you can return to your own body. As long as the formation was not destroyed, even if you went up, as long as your soul did not return at midnight, your physical body would be taken over by others. This was not the worst thing. The worst thing was that if you did not return, you would be completely roasted by the time the sun rose, and you would never be able to reincarnate. Why, do you still want to go up? Hellion Vivian smiled. Of course, there are still people waiting for me up there. Are you sure that the people waiting for you are really waiting for you? The little boy said ambiguously. Then, he pulled the two-headed hellhound to the side and slightly lifted his chin to point at the passage that looked like a fireplace. You can go down from here and return to the human world. Hellion Vivian narrowed her eyes and called out, Yuan Ming. Yuan Ming lowered his voice. There's no problem. It really leads to the human world. This child is the son of the King of Hell. He's in charge of the 3 halls of hell. He's temperamental, but he's trustworthy. He won't deceive people. Even his last words were good for you. If you go up, it's very likely that you won't be able to return to your body. You always say that even you can't see through Beligaju's ability. Hellion Vivian turned her head. This time, what do you think the probability of him discovering this formation is? Yuan Ming was stunned for a moment before he said, 70%. He really doesn't look like an ordinary human. No, it's at least 80%. Hellion Vivian lowered her eyes. Since we agreed to drink, he will definitely return to the palace early. When he can't find me, he will definitely think of something and follow the vine to find the melon. But, Yuan Ming frowned. But what? The words that the little King of Hell just said. Hellion Vivian's fingers stiffened for a moment until she felt cold. She slowly opened her mouth. He may not be waiting for me, boom. The flame in the center of the formation was burning more and more fiercely. Next to the flame, there was a large black carved wooden coffin. The person in the coffin was none other than the soulless Hellion Vivian. The man in white leaned over and looked at her. His slender fingers tucked her messy hair behind her ear. His jade-like face had a doting smile. Soon, you will wake up for real. Master. Yun Biluo, with her long hair fluttering in the wind, walked over. Today, she was different from usual. Instead of wearing those delicate colors, she picked up a beautiful red dress that was quite queen-like. The man in white glanced at her. His finger slid across Hellion Vivian's facial features. He mumbled for a while, then bit his index finger and wrote a talisman with his blood. He then put it on Yun Biluo's body. Yun Biluo was shocked. Her whole face began to change. Her watery eyes became clear. Her nose was taller than before, and the skin on her face became white and tender. She only lowered her eyes, but when she looked up again, she had completely changed her appearance. However, that wasn't the most shocking part. What made people feel a chill from the bottom of their hearts was that the face she transformed into was exactly the same as Vivian's. Go. There was a smile in the voice of the man in white. Haven't you always wanted to get Bailey Jiaju? Then think of all the tricks you have. At the very least, you have to make him stay quiet today and not come to make trouble. Yun Biluo looked at her own face in the river and turned around, saying, but, if I were to use Hellion Wei Wei's face, I just feel, this is the fastest way for you to get him. The man in white looked at her. Now that things have come to this, you should know better than anyone else that he won't look at any other woman except for Hellion Vivian. The past that you mentioned is completely useless. If you want to slowly penetrate his heart, you can only use this face. Don't worry, as long as you can stay calm tonight, from now on, he will only like you. Does it matter whose face you use? After listening to the man's words, Yun Biluo bit her thin lips lightly. She seemed to have made up her mind. Her lips curved into a gloomy smile. It doesn't matter at all. If it wasn't for Hellion Vivian's face, His Highness won't even look at that wandering soul from God knows where. Since she can be pampered by that person with this face, so can I. Chapter 559. At night, layers of thick fog rose. The moonlight hidden in the shade of the trees seemed to be tinged with the color of blood. It was gloomy and made people feel uncomfortable. In the Chaoyang sleeping hall, the palace maids lit the lanterns and stood respectfully on both sides. There was only one luminous pearl in the hall, and the light was much dimmer than usual. The change in the palace this time seemed to have cleansed the entire palace. The emperor looked at the memorials presented to him and narrowed his eyes. He couldn't suppress the anger in his heart and reached out to throw the memorials at Eunuch Gao's face. Eunuch Gao was in pain but didn't dare to cry out. He could only lower his head and bend over to pick them up. When he saw the words on the memorials, he turned his eyes and silently retreated to the side. This third prince, he is really looking down on me more and more. Even my subordinates were taken advantage of because of old Wu's confession this time. The emperor took a deep breath and looked at the pill in his hand with his dark eyes. He lowered his head and seemed to be muttering to himself, "Looks like I have to move that place too. I can't let him find out." Everyone said that the situation in the imperial court could change in an instant. Once again, the group of officials witnessed Bailey Jia Ju's iron fist. At first, it was just a small chanting of sutras by a senior monk. Who would have thought that so many officials would be involved in it? Even the people from the elder compound could not escape this calamity. "Your Highness, what about the chanting monks?" Aning knelt on the ground and asked. "They couldn't all be locked up in the palace, right?" If it was according to his usual habits, Baligaju would have killed them long ago. At this moment, he inexplicably thought of that pair of worried eyes. His fingers paused and said, "Exile them. The farther the better." "Yes." As Aning lowered his eyes, the minister of the Ministry of Personnel who was standing behind him also heaved a sigh of relief. He was really afraid that His Highness would casually kill them. These monks shouldn't have entered the palace with ulterior motives, but killing so many monks at once, wouldn't that be a sin? Fortunately, His Highness dealt with it more normally this time. Baligaju slowly brushed his sleeves and said in a clear and indifferent voice, "Ministerly, is there anything else?" "No, no more." He originally wanted to plead for those eminent monks, but he didn't expect it to go so smoothly. Baligaju closed the evidence in his hand about Elder Wu colluding with the imperial guards and stood up. "Since there is nothing else, let's investigate the river in the palace. It is not the rainy season recently. How did the river in the palace rise? Ministerly, haven't you thought about it?" Recently, Ministerly had been troubled by these strange cases in the palace. He had no clue at all. He didn't even have any idea how the deceased died. If it was just one or two people, it would be fine. No one would have thought that in just a few days, so many palace maids would die in the palace. Moreover, all of them had been drained of blood by some unknown method. Now, all the palace maids in the palace were trembling with fear. They were even a little absent-minded when doing things. If such a case had happened outside the palace, he would have had more time to investigate. However, it happened in the Imperial Palace, which was originally the safest place in the entire War Dragon Empire, yet such a thing actually happened. This was simply looking down on the Imperial Majesty. As the Minister of Official Personnel Affairs who was in charge of investigating the case, one could imagine how tormented he was in his heart. Now that he was reminded by the royal family, he finally understood. That's right, that river. How did that river appear? If it wasn't for that river, the dead bodies of the palace maids wouldn't have been discovered so late. This was definitely not a coincidence. There was no such thing as a coincidence in the world. The Minister of Official Personnel Affairs looked up again with an eager expression on his face. "Your Highness's thoughts are still alive. Why didn't this old official think of it?" "Because you are stupid." The light in Bailey Jia Ju's eyes was indifferent as he threw down these 4 words. Then, he strode out with his long legs and walked out. The Minister of Official Personnel Affairs looked back at Shadow. Was he being looked down upon by His Highness? Shadow raised his head and looked at the ceiling, pretending that he didn't understand the look in Minister Li's eyes. Today, Baligaju dealt with political affairs more gently than usual. He handed over the small fries to Minister Li and returned to the Jiuchong Palace when it was almost time. Many people who were scared to death heaved a sigh of relief. Your Highness." When the servants in the Juchong Palace saw Beligaju coming in, they quickly came forward to serve him. Beligaju reached out and unbuttoned the collar of his outer robe. His handsome face was slightly tilted, and the lines on his face were distinct. "Where is the Princess Consort?" "The Princess Consort is taking a bath," the servant replied respectfully and reached out to take Beligaju's outer robe. Beligaju raised the corner of his mouth. "Taking a bath?" Someone wanted to take the initiative to send herself into his mouth. "Go warm a pot of wine and bring it over," Bailey Jiaju instructed in a low and deep voice. His entire body was leaning on the carved wooden chair, and he casually picked up an ancient book. The servant answered, "Yes." Then, he left. Usually, when the Princess Consort was present, His Highness didn't want them to stay in the bedroom. This time was no exception. The other eunuchs were also discerning, so they bowed their heads and left. Beligaju was the only one left in the huge hall. He flipped through the scroll in his hand casually. He was wearing an ancient nightgown that hung down to his ankles. The aura of asceticism was unmistakable. His face that could captivate all living things was like the Qinghua under the moonlight. Unlike the indifference in front of others, he now had a touch of soul-stirring laziness. When Yun Biluo, who was disguised as Hellion Vivian, walked in and saw this scene, she only felt her heart stop for a moment and her breathing became a little irregular. Among all the men in the world, only this person was so handsome that all women couldn't resist. Yun Biluo calmed her breathing and softened her voice. "Your Highness." Beligaju raised his eyes and looked at her. His eyes were as deep as an ancient pool, giving people an unfathomable indifference. But now, this indifference showed signs of warmth. Yun Biluo saw it clearly, and because it was so clear, jealousy welled up in her heart. Why? Why was that woman from who knows where able to get special treatment from him? She was the one who was by his side when he was young. No one knew what he needed better than her. Yun Biluo clenched her hands that were hidden under the long sleeves. After all, it was because of this face. If that soul had not taken over Hellion Vivian's body, it wouldn't have attracted His Highness's interest. Now that she also had Hellion Vivian's face, she believed that His Highness would give her his unique love very soon. Thinking of this, Yun Biluo smiled. She was not stupid, she more or less knew that woman's character. She was usually arrogant and would not be close to His Highness. So, as she followed Hellion Vivian's posture and walked toward Beligaju. "Your Highness, have you finished your business?" Chapter 560. Hearing this, Bailey Jiaju carelessly put down the ancient scroll in his hand. His long black hair casually draped over his shoulders, matching his angular face. He glanced at her again, his voice faintly humming. His slender legs were crossed, his pitch-black hair no longer had the alienation in front of others. As usual, he unhurriedly ordered, "Come here." Yun Biluo was secretly delighted, but she did not show it on her face. She pretended to be cold and indifferent as she moved closer. Her body tilted, and just as she was about to snuggle into Beligaju's arms, the atmosphere was disrupted by the servant who walked in. "Your Highness." The servant held a wooden tray with both hands. On the tray was a pot of warm green bamboo leaf wine and 2 porcelain white wine glasses, "The wine you want." Beligaju took one of the wine glasses and played with it in his hand. Even his fingertips seemed to be glowing. His arrogant and bewitching handsome face became extraordinarily charming at this moment, especially when he casually supported his head with one hand and swirled the wine glass with the other. He was as flamboyant as an ancient god. His long and narrow eyes looked at the person opposite him with a faint smile. Yun Biluo was full of thoughts. Seeing that there were 2 wine glasses, she could roughly guess what was going on. She immediately went to get the other wine glass. The servant put down the tray respectfully and retreated. Yun Biluo saw that there was finally no obstacle. Her legs gave way and she wanted to repeat the same trick. However, she did not expect the man to stand up at this moment without warning, causing her to fall to the ground in an awkward position. Your Highness. Yun Biluo raised her eyes in confusion. Her heart was beating fast. Did he recognize her? Beligaju looked at her from above for a while, then slowly reached out his hand. His long and narrow eyes were as beautiful as the stars in the sky. Why are you so stupid? He did not recognize her. Yun Biluo could not help but feel relieved. She was about to put her hand in his palm. However, she saw that he avoided her touch. The strands of hair in front of his forehead moved slightly, and the smile at the corner of his mouth became elegant and bloodthirsty at that moment. It was like the datura flower that bloomed beside the Wangchuan River. It was full of indescribable evil, innate coldness, and an invisible murderous aura. Seeing someone do such a stupid thing with this face really makes me want to vomit. Yun Biluo's eyes shook. She could not help but take a step back. Your Highness, where is she? He looked down at her coldly. His fangs were slightly exposed, and he was as handsome as a god. His black robe wrapped around his slender figure, revealing a cold murderous aura. The surrounding wind suddenly, and it hurt when it blew on her face. Yun Biluo, and Yun Biluo. He was. And he was always elegant and lofty. A simple raise of his eyebrows was enough to make all the spirit beasts tremble. In fact, when he was enraged, everything around him would not have a good ending. Yun Biluo felt the fear buried deep in her body. Her voice was dry and unnatural. Your Highness, what are you talking about? I don't understand anything. She was in denial as she stepped back. She deceived herself by thinking that maybe he was just testing her. You don't understand. Bailey Jiaju took off the white gloves on his hands and bent down in a demonic manner. To him, the darkness was like daytime. His eyes, which were originally midnight, now seemed to have a faint demonic red. Do you want me to break one of your ribs before you can understand what I'm asking? Yun Biluo looked at the pair of eyes that were filled with evil. She was reminded of the time when he killed people with a smile on his face during the fire. In an instant, her scalp went numb. I don't understand. What did I do wrong? She was careful enough. Even the way she walked and talked was like that of Hellion Vivian. Beligaju pinched her neck and laughed coldly. You don't need to understand. Where is she? Your Highness, cough cough, we both know that you're just treating her as a substitute of Hellion Vivian. She's not the real Hellion Vivian. If she doesn't leave, Hellion Vivian won't come back. Is it because the real Hellion Vivian doesn't like you that you stopped the eminent monks from using the soul-sucking spell? Yun Biluo's face was getting paler and paler. She used all her strength to finish her words. She was still resentful of that person's good luck. However, Beligaju did not even answer. He tightened his grip on her neck as if he really wanted to kill her. I'll ask you one more time. Where is she? Yun Biluo was out of breath. She tiptoed and stared at him. Your Highness, she's just a shadow. If you want to get Hellion Vivian, you can ask the real Hellion Vivian to come back. Don't you understand what I'm saying? Beligaju lifted her up with one hand. Someone dared to touch the prey he had set his eyes on right under his nose. Compared to the raging waves of anger, countless panic surged from the bottom of his heart. He did not like the image he imagined. Whenever he thought of the person who buried her head in picking out snacks for him, who would throw a towel to him after bathing, who would lie on his lap and let him wipe her hair for her, who would go to the hidden spirit temple without a word and kowtow 9,990 times in order to reduce the sins on his body, who would never come back. He couldn't wait to kill someone. She even asked him what was wrong. Ha, that person was the only one. Even if he approached her with blood all over his body, she would not be afraid or hide. Instead, she would be so stunned that she would ask him where he was hurt. Why did these people have to take away the only thing that belonged to him? Unforgivable. In just a breath, it was as if something was completely broken. Fingernails as sharp as knives extended from the originally fair and slender fingers. Beligaju pinched his fingers into Yunbiluo's heart. Blood dripped down one drop after another. Yunbiluo widened her eyes and looked at the pair of eyes that had lost all humanity in disbelief. The pain in his chest had worn out all his patience. Beligaju pushed the dying Yunbiluo aside and put his index finger in front of his lips to make a shushing gesture. His bright red thin lips and pale skin made him emit a desperate and forbidden evil aura. Then, he stood up and straightened his proud back. A noble and arrogant aura suddenly rose. A corner of his long black cloak was lifted by the fierce wind. He stood up straight and wiped the blood off his finger in disgust. His figure flashed, and like a black fog, he quickly walked in the thick night sky. Everywhere he went, there would definitely be the smell of blood. Chapter 561. Beside the river, the 7 stars aligned like pearls. Hellion Vivian, who was sleeping in a wooden coffin, did not react at all. Her red ancient robe made her oval face look even more delicate and delicate. The man in white who was looking at her suddenly bent his finger. The corner of his mouth curled up, and there was a hint of coldness in his voice. "You're really useless. You can't even deal with Beligaju. Master, do you need me to help?" A small person with a gourd on his head walked over. There was a huge skeleton tied to his back. His small body did not seem to be affected by the weight of the skeleton. His posture was very standard. The man in white had a cold expression on his face. He coughed a few times. "No need. You have to stay here and watch over the fire of resentment. Don't let it extinguish. There are twin resentful spirits outside. No matter how powerful Beligaju is, he's just a mortal. If the most powerful resentful spirits of the demon world work together, he can only step into the yellow springs." Outside the barrier, a black figure quickly jumped over the wall. The fog-like figure appeared in the corridors of the various palaces from time to time. Many of the eunuchs on night duty thought that their eyes were playing tricks on them. They rubbed their eyes with all their might. When they stopped to take a look, there was indeed a man with long black hair in front of them. He was wearing a long cloak. His black eyes were faintly glowing as he looked at the cold palace not far away. His entire body was emitting a cold aura. But in the blink of an eye, there was nothing in front of them. There was only the boundless night sky. The eunuchs could not help but mutter in their hearts that they had seen a ghost. The hair on their bodies stood up. At this moment, Bailey Jiaju was no longer concerned about the impact his actions would have on the imperial palace. His dark pupils contracted as he stared at the wizardry barrier in front of him with a gloomy gaze. He then took a step toward the river. Ding! The crisp sound of a metal bell was like a small circle of ripples on the surface of the water suddenly being hit by raindrops. It suddenly spread in the air like a group of cold ghosts. "Ha ha!" A tender voice with an indescribable sense of strangeness came from the source of the darkness. "I didn't expect to be found so quickly." In the boundless night, 2 little boys appeared. They wore green shirts and red pants. Their faces were numb and empty. Their faint voice was like a pool of stagnant black water. "Not a bad soul. What a pity. Young master told us not to eat humans. Otherwise, it would be good to use you as nourishment. It doesn't matter. As long as we can kill him, we can slowly enjoy him. Although I prefer drinking a woman's blood to a man's, this man looks very tasty." The boy turned his head. His mouth was hollow and black, as if he wasn't the one who said those words. It was so eerie that it was suffocating. Beligaju's side handsome face, the bottom of his eyes condensed into ice. Get out of the way. These two words made the boy named Ming Yuan's reddened eyes turn. Then, with a flick of his wrist, the copper bell let out a crisp and long sound. The sound was very long, as if it was the sound of a soul being summoned from hell. Darkness shrouded the top of his head, and a constantly rising chill circulated in the surroundings. It transformed into snakes one after another, all of them biting towards Beligaju. Beligaju quickly got up. His black robe fluttered in the air at a dazzling speed. However, in the eyes of the resentful baby demon, those movements were simply clumsy. TSK, foolish human, you overestimate yourself. Wake up, you're no match for us at all. Whoosh! More snakes poured out of the nest, spitting out their scarlet tongues as they ruthlessly bit the back of Beligaju's hand. His thick black eyebrows furrowed, and his movements stiffened for a moment. However, he didn't stop his footsteps and continued to walk into the depths of the barrier. His black robe fluttered, and blood flowed down his fingertips, dripping onto the ground drop by drop. It was a bright but heart-wrenching red. The resentful spirit sneered, "You can actually still walk. But, this is the end, devour him." Whoosh! Another wave of black snakes moved out, but this time, they broke out of the ground around Beligaju's body. With a fast, sharp, and arrogant manner, they coiled around his body bit by bit, binding him up in circles. Then, they gradually tightened, densely biting his muscles, and injected extreme cold into his body like venom. It pressed on his heart as if it was suffocating, and blood gushed out of his mouth. What a beautiful scene. The resentful spirit laughed, even the blood is fresh. What do you think, Yuan? The resentful spirit laughed hoarsely, each time strangely. Right now, I just want to taste what he tastes like with my own mouth. It's time to end all of this. The resentful spirit's eyes were red, and its black mouth was open, indescribably terrifying. But what was even more frightening was that the black snakes that coiled around Beligaju seemed to have gone crazy. They coiled around his body densely until his whole body was wrapped around the ground. His original appearance could not be seen, but those black snakes did not stop. Okay, be gentle, don't eat all of him, leave some for me and Yuan. Before the boy finished his words, there was a crashing sound. Out of nowhere, large clumps of black feathers clustered together, and giant birds flew out. Black fog filled the air, as if something was quietly waking up. Yuan, listen, what is that sound? The resentful spirit who was relatively larger turned around and asked his younger brother. Yuan did not have time to listen, because when this sound rang out, he felt as if there was something deep in his blood that was about to be stirred up, and even his body was strange. Pang, pang, pang. As if affected by an unknown magnetic field, there was a huge vibration in his chest. He looked up with a pale face, and there was a faint blue light in his eyes. He was even affected to the point that his whole body was uncomfortable. Brother, there is someone there. The resentful spirit reached out and hugged him, and his expression became dignified. Except for a human who is not afraid of death, there is no one. But, why? Yuan's throat overflowed with a fishy sweetness, and blood kept flowing out from the corner of his mouth, but he did not seem to see it, and his eyes were blocked. I can feel that person's breath. That person. Compared to his younger brother, the elder brother's magic was weaker, so he naturally did not know anything. Except for the discomfort in his heart, he did not feel anything. Who is that person? Yuan slowly closed his eyes, and leaned on the sand tiredly. His thin lips were pale, and his eyes were filled with disbelief. Our most honorable king. Chapter 562. Following the boy's words, there was a loud bang. The black snake that was wrapped around Beligaju's body was blasted into pieces by an unknown force. In the midst of the bloody mist, the sound of footsteps could be heard. The two wraiths froze in their actions and slowly turned their heads. They only saw the black boots rhythmically tapping on the ground. The wind blew from all directions, fluttering Beligaju's black robes. He just stood there, aloof and cold, with an evil aura, filling the air with thick black smoke. The wraiths looked at him, their brown eyes slowly widening, as if they had seen something inconceivable. Their faces were filled with intense astonishment. They opened their pale thin lips, wanting to speak, but found that their throat was so dry that they couldn't make a sound. She could only watch helplessly as Bailey Jiaju walked closer and closer, closer and closer. Time seemed to have stopped. Beligaju's footsteps stopped in front of the two wraiths. From this angle, his slender legs looked even more straight and powerful. The side of his angular face was as pale as crystal, and was extremely evil. Compared to his cold and indifferent self, there was an indescribable feeling. Your Highness. The wraiths' faces suddenly changed. They reached out to grab the clothes in front of their chests and painfully lay on the ground, gasping for breath. Beligaju reached out and picked up one of the wraiths. The corners of his mouth were filled with an evil aura. This Highness will give you one last chance. Come, tell me, where did you put her? In the middle of the river. The boy's originally pale face now looked even more purple. The other wraiths trembled all over, afraid that Beligaju would hurt their brother. They raised their small face and said, Your Highness, it's not our fault. We just made a contract with someone. We didn't expect that person to be your prey. Who are you calling your Highness? When Beligaju lowered his eyes, the demonic red in his eyes flashed. Then, he raised his left hand and threw the wraiths back. Amidst the sounds of the wraiths around him, he resumed his lazy evil smile. His body was covered in blood, even his face was stained with spots of red. At this moment, he looked like an overlord who controlled the darkness. He was not as indifferent as before, but was shockingly handsome. The two wraiths stood in a row, not daring to speak again. They only watched the man walk into the depths of the night. He was obviously the evilest demon in the world, but he was tired of the superior attitude of a god. He had an incomparably holy face, and his movements were filled with ascetic elegance, deceiving all the people of the world. Whether it was demons or demons, they were filled with innate worship of him. This man had once stood outside the 9 heavens, illuminated by the light of Buddha, and worshipped by thousands of demons. Buddha asked him what he wanted to do. He said, I want the sky, can no longer cover my eyes, I want this land to be unable to bury my heart, I want all living beings to understand, I want all the Buddhas to vanish. That's right. That's their king. But why did the king look like he didn't recognize them? Also, didn't the king disappear? How did he become a human? Moreover, they could clearly sense an uncertain demonic aura from him. What was going on? The two wraiths looked at each other, their eyes filled with deep doubts. After that great battle, the descendants of the exorcists used their own flesh and blood to cast a seal. They escaped because of the resentment in the hearts of the people. The king's soul was split into pieces and fell into the human world, but his body disappeared forever. No one knew where he went. Both humans and demons thought that he had died long ago. Could it be that that person planned to come back from the beginning? In a way that no one could have imagined, he was reborn. Creak! Along with Bailey Jiaju's pacing, the fog that pervaded the night was like a broken glass, cracking with streaks of cracks. Vaguely, a deep flight of stairs appeared in the middle of the river. There were torches around the stairs, burning with blue flames. The little one guarding the fire of resentment paused. His round eyes widened in disbelief. His pupils flickered back and forth. Master, is this his aura? The demon-transforming beast was not as stable as the little one. The unknown pressure made its blood boil. Its claws seemed to have lost control of themselves and were trembling in fear. It could no longer stand up straight. It was as if someone was ordering it to kneel. The man in white raised his eyes. There was a trace of surprise in the corner of his eyes. In the rippling water, his dark eyes were as deep as an ancient well. He was gentle and elegant, but extremely dangerous. He's still alive. After saying that, the man turned his head and looked at the little one. How about the time? How much longer? Very soon. The little one threw another wraith into the torch. The flame burned brighter and brighter. It slowly spread around the coffin and enveloped Helly and Vivian. The man smiled. He bit his finger and fed the blood into Helly and Vivian's mouth. His eyes were full of love. Even if that person appears now, it won't change anything. You can't replace the Phoenix Girl. Go back to where you belong as soon as possible, Helly and Vivian. Boom! The blue flames burned. After returning from hell, Helly and Wei Wei finally felt something, but it was as painful as burning her skin. She could not integrate into the body at all, and the feeling of being burned to ashes made her feel as if she was in the blazing flames of hell. It was unbearable. She watched as another Helly and Vivian walked out of the lake and approached the body step by step. However, she did not even have the strength to move. Other than the figure in front of her, there was only a sea of fire. Her soul seemed to have lost consciousness. She did not know where it had drifted to. It was said that people would see the silhouettes of their previous lives before they died. However, what she saw was the little boy who stood alone in the 9 layers of the palace. He was abused by the palace servants until he could only eat coarse food. Even his mother, who was incomparably dignified in front of others, was no longer favored and treated him as a punching bag. She called him to her side and stabbed him with silver needles one by one. Cold blood flowed out from his fingers. He just leaned against the wooden door. His long hair was as dark as night and draped over his back. It made him look like a dejected elf. He lowered his eyes. There was a faint smile in his self-deprecating tone. How stupid. You know what the result is, but you're still so naive. As he spoke, the boy's black hair surged and covered his blood-red eyes. She stood in front of him. In the end, she could not help but feel sorry for him. She wanted to reach out and hug him. However, she strangely found that she went through his body. Chapter 563. With no other choice, Helly and Vivian could only helplessly sit with him on the steps. It was winter, and the snow was especially heavy in the capital. But he didn't move at all. His porcelain-like delicate little face had an unusual coldness. She didn't know if it was because too much time had passed, but it was so long that even Helly and Vivian felt that her hands and feet were cold. Only then did the boy suddenly raise his eyes. Helly and Vivian thought that he had finally seen her and was about to open her mouth to speak. But she saw him look past her face and set his eyes on a delicately dressed little girl. That little girl was very beautiful and looked to be of noble birth. She wore a double-buttoned long skirt and a pink fur cloak. She was currently hugging a pile of food and looking at him, as if she was very scared. She quickly put down the things in her hands and ran away. She could faintly hear her say, "That third prince is so scary. Brother Chongfeng, wait for me." Scary? The boy lowered his eyes and looked at his palm, as if he had heard a funny joke. He laughed deeply, with a kind of evil aura that made one's heart ache. If Helly and Vivian didn't see wrong, that little girl should be the original body in her memory when it was young. She was very kind, and when she looked at the boy, she was full of pity. Could it be because of this that Beligaju treated this body differently from the previous owner of this body? Hellion Vivian stood in place, her body a bit stiff. In fact, she had always felt guilty in her heart. She shouldn't have taken this body. But Yuan Ming had already told her that if she hadn't entered this body, it would have been dead. Yuan Ming's meaning was very simple. That was to say, if she hadn't transmigrated, the previous Hellion Vivian would very likely have died in that river. She wouldn't have casually brought a dead soul with her. That was why her guilt wasn't so obvious. But, Hellion Vivian turned her head, and her eyes moved slightly. Did His Highness want her, or did he want this body's previous owner? Hellion Vivian's originally firm heart loosened in an instant. She wasn't good at relationships. When they were together, they would do things based on secret manuals. In any case, there was only one thought in her mind. I definitely can't let someone suffer. But was this what a normal man would want? Hellion Vivian was a little uncertain. She had always been a woman. She had also passed the age of innocence, so she naturally did not have any pity in her heart. She liked to be overcautious, but she couldn't learn to be innocent, just like that little girl. Since you're afraid, then don't get close. Didn't they know that the cat like His Highness was actually very sensitive? Just by looking at the way he usually looked at others, it was as if he was a high and mighty emperor. One could tell how proud he was. What was there to be afraid of? Hellion Vivian admitted that she was a little angry. She didn't know if she was angry at the little girl's words or Beligaju's attitude. Her legs began to feel weak again, as if her entire body had been soaked in water. It should have been very comfortable, but because of the color of the water, she felt a little depressed. Everywhere was a dark red that made one's hair stand on end. The river didn't seem like water, but more like someone's blood. The row of palace maids that Hellion Vivian saw before appeared again. Their faces were still expressionless, as rigid as wooden puppets. When the iron chains under their feet entered the water, it made a dull sound, but they walked forward numbly as if they didn't hear it, until the river water flooded over their heads, leaving only black hair floating on the surface of the river. That kind of scene was very scary, but Hellion Vivian was getting closer and closer to them. The black hair seemed to be pulled by something in the water, moving towards Hellion Vivian, as if it wanted to swallow her up. Hellion Vivian wanted to avoid it, but found that her four limbs didn't listen to her at all. Her hands and feet seemed to be controlled by someone. Her thoughts were clear, but she couldn't move as she pleased. Instead, she leaned to the side and directly faced the black hair. Hellion Vivian narrowed her eyes, used all her strength, raised her arm, and slashed in the direction of the black hair. The black hair didn't expect that she still had room to fight back. After pausing in place, it became even crazier. Hellion Vivian bit her thin lips, large beads of sweat overflowed from her forehead. Her face was so pale that it seemed to have lost all color, but this didn't stop her from wanting to slash a second time. Swish! The thin silver knife was shockingly sharp, and it stabbed the center of the black hair in an instant. The black hair finally stopped, like a dense mass of algae floating on the surface of the river, motionless. However, something even scarier came. Hellion Wei had just turned her head when she saw a face. She couldn't be more familiar with that face, but because it was too close, no matter how she looked at it, it made her feel terrified. I didn't expect you to be so stubborn, even resentment can't do anything to you. You should have returned my body long ago, why do you keep occupying my things? The mouth of the face moved again and again, using a pair of empty eyes to look at Hellion Vivian. Hellion Vivian smiled, no matter how tired she was, it couldn't hide her prodigal strength. You should have drowned long ago, why don't you die? You. The face seemed to be angered, looking at Hellion Vivian, it thought of something and smiled lightly. I know, you don't want to leave, it's all because of the third prince. But you also saw, if it wasn't for me, the third prince wouldn't have treated you differently at all. Don't tell me, even now, you still don't understand who the third prince is obsessed with. Helene Vivian tightened the silver knife in her hand, her eyes cold. This kind of question, it's better to ask clearly in person. As for whether he treats me differently because of you, when I go back, I'll naturally know the answer. Do you think I'll believe whatever you say? Are you insulting my intelligence? You know better than anyone how worried the third prince is about this body. I don't need to say this, right? The face laughed, as if it was mocking her. He's even more worried about this body than he is about you. Thinking about it, it's only a substitute, so he won't pay too much attention to it. But no matter how much you struggle, it's useless. Once the seal is broken, the demons will run rampant. I have to go back. Helene Vivian listened to her words, only to feel a sudden pain in her back. When she looked back, she found out that the black hair didn't die at all. Instead, it was boiling, directly penetrating her ribs, entangling her inch by inch, pulling her whole body into the endless deep water. Oh. Chapter 564. Bang! Under the shaking of the tree, the skeleton on the little one's back was crushed into powder by the vibration. He raised his head and looked at the man in white with a worried expression. Master. It's all right, the aura of resentment is enough. The man raised his slender and fair hand and caressed Helene Vivian's face. This time, she will definitely come back. Bang! Another sound was heard. But this time, it was the coffin beside the man in white that was shattered. The man in white's dark pupils shrunk and his fingers stiffened as he looked behind him. Countless black feathers spread out and turned into a slender figure one by one. The figure walked out from the black feathers that were falling from the sky. He was holding the demon-transforming beast that was guarding the door in one hand. His long robe fluttered as he tore apart all the aura of resentment. He squinted his eyes slightly. His jawline was like a quiet bay, so cold and noble that no one could take their eyes off him. How dare you touch my people? Guardian of the exorcising tribe, do you really think that I won't kill you? I didn't want to do anything to her. The man in white turned around. He was wearing a white robe with wide sleeves and smelled of medicine. Who else could it be other than the rare Master Jing? She doesn't belong to this world. Let her go back to her original place so that Ni Feng can come back. Since you're not dead, shouldn't you want to see Ni Feng come back? Bailey Jia Ju looked at him with a hint of mockery in his eyes. He did not say anything. He just waved his long sleeve and the huge blue torch was about to dim. She won't. Jing Wuxuang smiled faintly and coughed lightly. His slender figure stood up and the corner of his mouth was indescribably gentle. She's already on her way back. As if in response to his words, the red flame under the sandalwood coffin was faintly discernible. It gathered into a 5 elements 8 trigrams diagram and emitted a gentle light of Buddha. That was the divine exorcism seal that was set up by the exorcising tribe and various eminent monks. It had the ability to strike fear into all demons. The formation had been completed. Even if Bailey Jia Ju was that person and had great abilities, everything was a foregone conclusion. Jing Wuxuang curled her thin lips at the thought of this. She was waiting for the person in the coffin to wake up. However, she saw Bailey Jia Ju walking toward the divine exorcism seal. The little one also saw this scene. Her eyes widened as she said, "He actually wants to destroy the soul exchange array. Doesn't he know that no matter how powerful the demon is, once he steps into the divine exorcism seal, his soul will be destroyed?" Tap! Bailey Jia Ju walked towards the coffin. Even if it was just a few ordinary steps, he could still walk in a straight line elegantly. His straight back and graceful hands hanging by his side showed that he was a man of high cultivation. Even though his face was cut by the Buddhist light of the divine exorcism seal, and his icy blood dripped to his feet, dyeing the stone floor red, he did not stop at all. His fingers seemed to have been burned, and he could not bend them. The divine exorcism seal seemed to have sensed something. More rays burst out and pierced his chest in an attempt to resist the demon's invasion. In just a breath, fingernails as sharp as knives grew on Bailey Jiaju's originally fair and slender fingers. "Master! You can't!" Fire Qilin, who sensed danger, finally rushed back. However, it was all too late. It looked at Bailey Jiaju, who was surrounded by the Buddhist light, and its huge eyes shook violently. The fragments of its master's soul had not merged yet. If it recklessly stepped into the divine exorcism seal, it was afraid that it did not think further. Instead, it leaped and tried to scratch a corner of the seal with its claws. However, before it could touch the mark on the ground, it was suddenly scorched by a sudden heat. It burned its entire claws. It was only standing at the entrance of the divine exorcism seal, but it was attacked so fiercely. How uncomfortable would its master be when he was surrounded by the Buddhist light? At that moment, Fire Qilin was really scared. It was worried that its master would be disintegrated again. If that was the case, how many lifetimes would it have to wait for its master again? "It's over," Jing Wushuang looked at the ball of Buddhist light. Her eyes fell, and she was truly relieved. However, what she did not expect was that Bailey Jiaju, who had originally stopped, laughed. Under the illumination of the Buddhist light, he became more and more handsome, and at the same time, more and more evil. It was like the red spider lilies that bloomed all over the demon world. It was rare in the world. The huge wings on his back spread out without warning, spreading out all the Buddhist light. The black feathers that symbolized sin, darkness, and greed fell one after another. The devil's song was played, and together with his wings, they slowly flew, as if they could embrace the stars in the sky. He looked at the bloodstains on his hands and stuck out his tongue to lick them. The corners of his mouth were curved into an evil smile. Jing Wushuang narrowed her eyes in disbelief. However, Bailey Jiaju was not interested in her at all. His eyes were fixed on the coffin not far away. The color of his eyes slowly changed, and they were dyed red by blood. There was not a trace of black in his pupils. Even the whites of his eyes were quickly covered with blood vessels, entangling with each other, like two complicated blood totems. Even his body was emitting a dark aura. He was like a phantom in a withered castle, elegant, strange, cold, and filled with hatred. "Oh no!" Fire Qilin suddenly stood up. Master's soul was incomplete, so he would definitely lose all his senses and only know how to kill and suck blood. Then, wouldn't the only human here, Hellion Vivian, be in danger? Moreover, she was the prey that Master was most satisfied with. Then, Master would be the first one to suck dry. Master. "You can't do that." Fire Qilin growled, "You will definitely regret it if you suck that person dry." Bailey Jiaju did not look back, as if he did not hear Fire Qilin's words at all. He walked slowly to the coffin. He looked at Hellion Vivian, and the corners of his mouth slightly raised. That face that could turn all living things upside down, green and red blood vessels appeared, like gorgeous vines, and like curves, entangled around his pale cheeks. What a delicious soul. The formation was completely destroyed. Only the smell of blood was left in the surroundings. The rich sweetness spread in the nose and went straight to the brain, teasing every fragile nerve. The thought of sucking broke through his rationality. That feeling was indescribable, and it was 100 times worse than the hunger of humans. In an instant, he carried Hellion Vivian in his arms. Hellion Wei Wei couldn't see anything as she was immersed in the dark fog. She seemed to have felt something, and that was his slightly cold fingers circling around her waist, carrying a unique chill, calming all of her emotions. Bailey Jiaju smiled mischievously as if he was happy to get an obedient food. His thin lips fell on her slender neck. He always treated her in the most pampering way. Even when he was about to devour her, he still treated her with the same gentleness. Oh. Chapter 565. At this moment, Helene Vivian moved her fingers in the darkness. No, she couldn't just sink to the bottom of the water and do nothing. The rejected figure's expression darkened. What else do you want to do? It's useless. Even if the array is destroyed, you can forget about coming back unless you agree to be my shadow. Be your shadow. Helene Vivian widened her eyes. They were like the brightest stars, emitting a cold light. Every word that came out of her mouth seemed to have been quenched in ice. Why should I? No one could be her master. She was who she was. With that, Helene Vivian straightened her body and stood in the middle of the river. As her long robe fluttered, a whirlpool formed with Helene Vivian's feet as the center, rolling up layer after layer of waves. Her long hair fluttered as if she was flying in the 9 heavens. Then, with a shake of her sleeve, her fair left hand slashed towards the river with a force that could control the winds and clouds of the world. Boom! The figure trembled as he watched the body get further and further away from him. His eyes shook in disbelief. She could actually resist the power of the Exorcist tribe. And her Dharma. That was clearly the Dharma that appeared when the Buddha descended into the blood sea and saved thousands of demonic souls. This woman, who exactly is she? The raging waves engulfed the figure's pale face, as if something had cracked in the river. With a splash, the river receded, and the torch was extinguished. Beligaju, who was about to suck, paused with his long, narrow, and indifferent blood-red eyes. He lowered his eyes and looked at the little thing in his arms. Inexplicably, he wanted to see what she looked like when she opened her eyes. If that was the case, wouldn't it be more delicious to suck? He had never liked dead things. Even though he didn't like them, he instinctively didn't want her to lose her current temperature because that would make him feel an unprecedented emptiness. However, his throat was so dry that it felt like it was being torn apart. Even the corners of his mouth were filled with sinful patterns. That was a sign that he had completely turned into a demon. The smell just now, it really was you. Helene Vivian was still very weak. The moment she opened her eyes, she frowned. Beligaju, what happened to you? Yuan Ming jumped out of the Xian Huan space and anxiously shouted, Wei Wei, quickly leave him. He's going to cultivate the devil. Demonic cultivation. Helene Vivian looked at the overly handsome face of the man in front of her, and then turned her head to look at his finger that was constantly dripping blood. Regardless of whether he was going to cultivate the devil or not, she directly lifted his hand. Your hand. Beligaju froze. Did this little thing not know that he was going to suck her dry? She was concerned about his hand. Ha! Humans are indeed stupid. Just as Beligaju was thinking about this, he suddenly realized something. She kissed his finger and murmured, It can stop bleeding and disinfect. Beligaju's heart suddenly trembled. His eyes stared at the little face in front of him. The temperature slowly spread from his skin to the depths of his heart. Wei Wei. He said, his thick eyebrows slightly wrinkling. Even he didn't know why he spat out this name. Countless images flooded into his mind. He stood in front of the heavenly Tao's 100-foot golden Buddha and disobeyed the 6 paths. He sat on the throne and a group of demons danced at his feet. He killed demons and Buddhas, never willing to convert. After the dusk of the gods, he was in chaos for 9 days and nights before finally falling from heaven. However, to him, all of these were just extremely boring tricks. The last scene was of her lowering her head to pick out pastries for him. His sharp nails dug deep into his palm and blood seeped through the fine cracks in his robe. You Stay away from me. He pushed Hellion Vivian away. His slightly messy black hair hung down and his black fingertips trembled violently. It seemed that this was the only way to calm the surging feeling of sucking blood. Something attacked from behind. It was the backlash of the divine seal of demon. The light of Buddha turned into a golden beam. It wanted to take advantage of Baligaju's most chaotic and weak moment to annihilate him in one fell swoop. Hellion Vivian's eyes suddenly narrowed. She turned around and protected Baligaju under the foot of the wall. The light behind her burned out the last trace of light. The demon blood in Baligaju's body completely boiled at this moment. He suddenly raised his hand and pinched Hellion Vivian's chin. His thin lips opened and closed again. The bloodstains on his face began to turn red, like an enchanting flower blooming on his face. He was so evil and handsome that even the heavens and earth were eclipsed. Then, his fist brushed past the side of Hellion Wei Wei's body and struck downwards. Immediately, cracks appeared on the ground. There was a type of true aristocrat who, no matter how vulgar their actions were, would still reveal an innate elegance. They did not need to deliberately pay attention to etiquette or details, because 1,000 years had already worn away the edges of these nothingness. Baligaju put his right hand on the ground and pressed his eyes with the other hand. Bright red blood slid down his fingers. He deliberately hurt himself, as if he wanted to maintain the last remnants of his reason. However, he couldn't resist the instinct of demonization. Baligaju's scarlet eyes narrowed. With a few loud pops, the bright soul-changing Buddhist lamps fell from both sides one after another. They fell straight to the ground and broke into pieces of petals. At this moment, a fire Qilin suddenly flew up, braving the pain of being pierced by the light of Buddha. It wanted to restore Baligaju's nature. But everything was too late. Baligaju also knew. He couldn't hurt her, he definitely couldn't hurt her. His long and narrow eyes emitted the last trace of scarlet. Baligaju suddenly grasped the remnant sword light of the seal and ruthlessly pierced himself. The sharp blade pierced through his left shoulder, pierced his robe, and stabbed into his butterfly bone. Fresh blood filled Hellion Wei Wei's eyes in an instant. Everything happened so fast that she didn't have time to react. The person in front of him fell backwards. Countless black feathers rose up from his black robe. The black color on his fingers faded away, and they returned to their pure white color. His elegant and cold handsome face, with a hint of bloodlust, was like a mandala blooming in the middle of the night, exuding a beauty that could make people fall into depravity. Fresh blood soaked through his ascetic black holy robe. Because of the dark color, no blood stains could be seen. However, Hellion Wei Wei knew that he had stabbed deeply with his sword. Hellion Wei Wei didn't know how to react. At this moment, all that was left of her calmness was trembling, yet she desperately wanted to use her hands to block the blood that was flowing out. For the first time in her life, she tasted what was called panic. The light of the divine exorcist seal faded. Fire Qilin anxiously flew over. When it saw the wound on Baligaju's body, its eyes trembled. It immediately moved, wanting to find the soul fragments and stuff them into Baligaju's body. However, those soul fragments seemed to be blocked by something and couldn't enter at all. Chapter 566. Master, the little one with the bottle gourd on his head watched this scene from afar and reached out to tug on Jing Wushuang's sleeve. Jing Wushuang never thought that his formation would fail. He coughed heavily and opened his palm to reveal blood stains. Master! The little one could not bear to watch any longer. He pulled Jing Wushuang into the river. Jing Wushuang curled his lips into a smile, but the corners of his mouth were filled with loneliness. In the water, he raised his hand to cover his eyes. The little one comforted him, "If it doesn't work this time, there's always a next time. Master, don't be sad." Jing Wushuang did not reply. When he saw Hellion Vivian in that state, he did not know why, but he felt a faint pain in his chest. Master. The little one placed his hand on his forehead. Let's go. While they're distracted, the fire Qilin was indeed distracted. Its front paw froze and it exerted its strength again. The result was the same as before. As expected, an incomplete soul fragment could not condense a soul. Feed him blood. Yuan Ming, who was initially unwilling to speak, sighed when he saw Hellion Vivian's red eyes. He needs a lot, but this is only enough to maintain his soul and life. It's not certain whether he'll wake up. He stabbed himself too hard just now. He's probably afraid that he won't be able to control himself and will suck you dry. Hellion Vivian heard Yuan Ming's words and did not hesitate at all. She reached out and pulled out the dagger on her body and stabbed her wrist hard. Fresh blood stained Beligaju's lips. The soul fragments finally floated around Beligaju and did not fade away. Yuan Ming looked at Hellion Vivian's increasingly pale face and said, "That's enough. You just came out of the formation. Your energy is limited. I know my own body best. Look at him." Hellion Vivian's voice finally stopped trembling. She let Beligaju lie on her lap and lowered her gaze. The soul fragments reacted and transformed into blood-red flames, burning around Beligaju. When Yuan Ming saw this scene, his eyes narrowed. Wei Wei, stop first. I'll stop when he recovers. Hellion Vivian's tone was very calm, but it revealed a kind of unsettling stubbornness. Yuan Ming looked at her and frowned. Do you know what will happen if he wakes up when his soul is missing? He will be completely demonized. At that time, don't even think that he will have any rationality left. Even if he's a demon, I'll bring him back. Hellion Wei Wei suddenly raised her eyes. The deep red color of blood still remained in her eyes, carrying the arrogance of killing Buddha if Buddha blocked her way. Yuan Ming stared blankly for a moment, then he smiled evilly. You are really... All right, let's give it a try. You and the fire Qilin discuss and find a way to get his 3 spiritual souls back. That way, he should wake up. The fire Qilin knows everything, it understands its master the best. That's right, I really do understand my master. The fire Qilin lowered its eyes. It's just that it's not that easy to gather his soul fragments. In the past, we only needed to find the soul fragments and put them all together into Master's body. Now, we need to talk to those lost souls face to face. Only if they are willing to come back with the princess will it work. But those souls are all Master's own. At that time, Master didn't know the princess, so how could he believe the princess? Hellion Vivian's finger brushed across Beligaju's slightly cold face and said in a low voice, "We have to try. As for whether he believes or not, that's something I need to solve. You just need to tell me the method." The fire Qilin raised its head and glanced at Hellion Vivian. It steadied its steps. Right now, there's only this method. I will use my own thoughts to send you to the place where Master's 3 souls are. Even I know where those places are, so you must ensure that you can protect yourself well. Moreover, you must rush back within 49 days. Otherwise, Master's body will completely lose its life. In these 49 days, I will guard by Master's side and prevent the souls around him from being destroyed, as well as the demons who try to open the seal. The reason why the capital is so quiet is because Master is here. Now that Master's breath is weak, the originally weak barrier will have a bigger hole and more demons will flood into the capital. Master's body is the fastest evolving sacred object for them, so it must be guarded by me and the Azure Dragon together. After you set off, I will immediately go to White Academy and place Master's body at the bottom of the Azure Dragon Lake. We will only wait for the princess to bring Master's 3 souls back. All right. Hellion Vivian replied while biting open her sleeve. She used it as a bandage and wrapped it around her wrist. The fire Qilin looked at her, its eyes floating. It can be confirmed that the three souls are in different places. When this soul agrees to come back, the princess will immediately send it to the next place. If it doesn't succeed, you must bite off this red string and come back immediately. Hellion Vivian glanced at the red string and took it over to tie it around her wrist. Her calm gaze swept over Beligaju, only then did it have a slight change. The fire Qilin continued, this time, you can only go by yourself. When you reach that place, the demon's messenger and spirit beasts by your side will disappear, so you must be careful. All right. Hellion Vivian put down her long sleeve. The corner of her eyes was still stained with blood. Seeing her like this, the fire Qilin added, there's one thing that the princess must pay attention to. What is it? Hellion Vivian listened attentively. The fire Qilin lowered its voice. It's very likely that the master will bewitch you to stay in the place you go. You must remember that it's not the complete master. Once you agree to stay, the master will never wake up, and the place you go to will no longer exist. Hearing this, Hellion Vivian paused and said, I know. Princess Consort, you must remember this. The fire Qilin repeated and then said, and the place you go, can't all be perfect. According to the master's thoughts, before the fire Qilin could finish, Hellion Vivian interrupted, according to his thoughts, the soul will be in different stages, right? Yes. The fire Qilin finally relaxed a little, since the princess knows, then it's easy. What I want to say is that the master may show different personalities. When the time comes, Hellion Vivian said, when the time comes, I'll naturally solve it. He liked to be flattered. When he saw dishes he didn't like, his pale thin lips would be pressed into a line. For Hellion Vivian, no matter what kind of personality it was still him. Anne. The fire Qilin cleared its throat, the master has a hobby. Chapter 567. He is rather harsh on the things he is interested in, and he is very keen on training. Training sounded nice. Master's soul fragment would be even more perverse than the complete soul fragment. It didn't know what Master would do to Princess Consort. Hellion Vivian looked at Fire Qilin and smiled slowly. Qilin, what are you worried about? If he is really interested in me, wouldn't it be easier to get close to him? Fire Qilin was shocked. It did not expect to get such an answer. Its eyes shook twice before it smiled. Princess really treats Master differently. Then we will prepare now and send you over as soon as possible. Wait a minute. Hellion Vivian turned her head and summoned Little White. Her voice was low and hoarse. Little White, when I am not here, find the person who set up the array today. I have a feeling that things will not end so easily. Princess is right. The fire Qilin nodded. This array must have been set up by the exorcising tribe. When your soul leaves your body, the other party will most likely target you. It's not safe in the palace. I'll bring you and His Highness to the Green Dragon Lake. It's time to let the Green Dragon know about Master's situation. At night, on the sparkling lake, a deep shadow could be faintly seen rolling back and forth, moving the water plants. Fire Qilin carried Hellion Wei Wei and Bailey Jia Ju and walked toward the deep shadow. Then, it shouted in a deep voice, Green Dragon. The deep shadow swam back and flew out of the lake amidst the fog. It stayed in the air and looked down at the newcomer with a trace of light in its eyes. It's you? Why are you here? It had disappeared during the Great War back then. Green Dragon always thought that Fire Qilin betrayed their master. Now that it saw it, its attitude was naturally not good. Its whole face was filled with violence. I don't care why you are here. Since you want to die, I will fulfill your wish. Green Dragon raised its dragon claw and was about to land. However, he was stopped by Hellion Wei Wei's indifferent voice. Green Dragon, haven't you been waiting for your master? Now that he has appeared, why can't you recognize him? Master. The azure dragon's large eyes shook violently. Its white dragon whiskers moved slightly. It suddenly focused its gaze and looked towards the black-clothed man in Hellion Vivian's arms. It was a face that could not be described with words. His facial features were elegant and restrained. Even if his eyes were closed, he was still so perfect that the sun and moon would avoid him and the galaxy would shatter. Azure Dragon almost forgot to breathe, and his voice trembled. It's really Master, it's really Master. But what's going on? As it spoke, it suddenly turned its head and looked at the Fire Qilin. How did Master become like this? Where did the Buddha's aura come from? The Fire Qilin said in a steady voice, it's a long story. Now that Master's soul is incomplete, it's very likely that he will fall again and disappear without a trace. We have to find all of his souls. You already knew that Master was still alive. The Azure Dragon listened to its words and raised its dragon whiskers. The Fire Qilin nodded. When Master was betrayed, I felt that something was wrong. When the divine exorcism seal descended on the world, I began to look for clues about Master's reincarnation. That's why I didn't appear in the palace at that time. All I know is that you were trapped in the Green Dragon Lake and the sky-devouring beast was nowhere to be found. The sky-devouring beast was beaten until its soul was scattered. The Azure Dragon lowered its eyes and swept its gaze across Beligaju's face. You know, we've only seen the sky-devouring beast's beast form. It has always been inseparable from Master, and Master would take it with him wherever he went. However, Master was missing at that time, and the Buddha asked it to convert. How could it listen? It caused chaos everywhere, and was whipped by 3,000 rays of Buddha's aura for 10 days. In the end, it couldn't resist and turned into ashes. The Fire Qilin closed its eyes and shook its head. No, I feel that the sky-devouring beast is still there. When Master subdued the sky-devouring beast, he gave it his blood. As long as Master is there, the sky-devouring beast will always be there. We have to help Master recover as soon as possible. What should I do? It was recorded in the history books that the Azure Dragon and the Qilin, one was water, and the other was fire. They had always been incompatible. When they met, they would definitely fight to the death, and the earth would collapse and the mountains would shake. But no one knew. For their master, they could be more united than any other beast. Especially the pair of divine beasts, the Azure Dragon and the Qilin. I'll be in charge of the periphery, and you'll be in charge of suppressing the entire lake. The Fire Qilin raised its eyes and glanced at the sky that was about to brighten. It's fine during the day, but once it's night, there will definitely be demons coming out of the hole. I'll try my best to hide Master's aura, but you know that Master's blood is not so easy to hide. I can only hold on for 30 days at most. After 30 days, those demons should find out where Master's body is. When that time comes, we'll have to fight a tough battle. You'll be in charge of looking after the Princess Consort and Master's body. No matter what happens, don't leave this lake. Other than the demons, there's also an exorcist in the capital, so you must be careful not to be affected by the resentment array. The Azure Dragon's eyes darkened. I know. Don't worry, even if I become an evil dragon, I won't let anyone have any ideas about Master. There's also the Princess Consort. The Fire Qilin smiled. That's our mistress. For the first time, the Fire Qilin acknowledged Hellion Vivian in front of her. It knew better than anyone else that if there was no Hellion Vivian today, Master would have completely turned into a demon. He would have turned into a walking corpse that only knew how to kill and drink blood. Moreover, it was afraid that there wouldn't be a second person who would block the 32 rays of Buddha's light for Master without hesitation, and then cut her own wrist to feed Master her blood. The Fire Qilin raised its eyes and bowed to Hellion Vivian. Its attitude was so respectful that the Azure Dragon couldn't help but take another look at Hellion Vivian. Previously, when Hellion Vivian unlocked its iron chains, the Azure Dragon felt that this human was different from the ones it had seen before. Now that it heard the Fire Cheelan's words, it was even more surprised. This was because it had never thought that its master, who had never been interested in women, would truly regard a woman as their mistress. But since the Fire Cheelan said so, then she must be different to its master. All right, it's getting late. Hellion Vivian opened her mouth and interrupted the Azure Dragon's thoughts. Her fingers traced the side of Beligaju's perfect face. She leaned forward slightly and kissed his pale thin lips. Then, she stood up and continued, let's start now. Cheelan, send me to where he is. Chapter 568. Okay. Fire Cheelan nodded and stomped heavily on the ground with its thick claws. Clouds rose and around Beligaju and Hellion Vivian, complicated marks appeared. The shape of those marks was like a 5-pointed star, and Hellion Vivian was standing in the center. Dawn broke in the east and the first rays of the morning sun shone on Hellion Vivian's body. The light rays rapidly gathered at a speed visible to the naked eye until they wrapped around Hellion Vivian's entire body. Only then did the light and heat gradually fade away. After an unknown period of time, Hellion Vivian suddenly opened her eyes. The scenery in front of her had changed, and the surroundings were bitterly cold. Hellion Vivian didn't expect the place she came to be normal, but she had never seen this place before, especially now that she and 2 other girls were in the mouth of a magical beast. It was a very bad feeling. She rose and fell up and down, and there was a strong wind in her ears. Hellion Vivian was thinking about how to escape when the girl beside her curled her lips at her. King hates timid humans the most. I don't know why they picked you up halfway, but your skin is a little fairer. Hellion Vivian didn't speak. Usually, when she didn't understand the situation, she would maintain absolute silence. Moreover, she came with a purpose this time. Little Kuei, don't say that. The other girl tugged at that person's sleeve and looked up at Hellion Vivian. I don't think you are from our exorcist temple. Where did you come from? How did you appear next to the altar? Hellion Wei said faintly, I've forgotten. When I woke up, I was already in this state. You must have hit your head when you fell down the mountain. The girl in purple looked at her with pity in her eyes. Hellion Wei calmly pressed her forehead and shook it back and forth a couple of times. It should be. What a pity. Don't worry, I'll take care of you when we reach the Myriad Devil Palace. Hellion Vivian's fingers froze. 10,000 Devil Hole. Sister and I, why do you care about her? The pink-robed girl raised her chin as a look of disdain flashed across her quiet and pretty little face. This time, it was the king who had taken the initiative to ask you to come over. Who does this woman, who has come from nowhere, think she is? The purple-clothed girl gave the pink-clothed girl a warning look. Little Kuei, it's precisely because the person the king is looking for this time is me that I can't let others be implicated. You also know that no matter how elegant he usually looks, in fact, the hostility in his bones is stronger than anyone else. No one can predict what he will do in the next second. Then he treats Sister and I differently too. Xiao Kuei's eyes were filled with envy. He's really good to Sister and I. The purple-clothed girl smiled at first, but then she looked a little dejected. Hellion Vivian's expression did not change as she listened by the side. The dagger under her long sleeve was hidden again. According to the Fire Cheelan, it would send her to Beligaju. Since she appeared here, according to the plan, would she be able to see Beligaju sooner? Hellion Vivian decided to wait and see. She looked into the distance. In the thick fog, hidden behind the dark clouds were countless towering rooftops in the air. It was bustling but cold. The huge holy temple stood majestically at the foot of the volcano. It meandered to the bank of the Solo River. No sunlight could shine in there as the thick fog covered everything. Helene Vivian could not see its full appearance. She could only see a sea of flowers in full swing, drifting on the dark river. It was indescribably beautiful. Floating above were souls that could not ascend to heaven. It was like a cloud, making Helene Vivian unable to move her eyes away for a moment. Xiao Kuei sneered. Sister and I, look at her. She really looks like a country bumpkin who has never seen the world. She hasn't even seen the sticks. The sticks? Helene Vivian's eyes narrowed dangerously. The bottom of her eyes was like an ancient well. She had read about it in a book before. There was a river in this world. Countless red spider lilies spread on its banks. Everyone said that it symbolized misfortune and despair. Even so, it could not resist people's yearning for it. It grew in the places where souls were the most concentrated. When the breeze blew, one could hear a faint song. That was the singing of the mermaids. They slept at the bottom of the river, summoning souls. Don't think that the mermaids here were beautiful things. Yes, they were very beautiful. They had the most ethereal voices and clean faces in the world. When they looked into your eyes, you could not help but agree to anything they wanted. However, when you agreed, they would show their sharp teeth and quickly drag you to the deepest part of the river. They would gnaw on you until there was nothing left. There were too many legends about the sticks. But what really concerned Helene Vivian was that this river could only be seen in the demon world and hell. Obviously, this was not hell. Since it was not hell, it could only be the free demon world. She actually came to the demon world. Helene Vivian resisted the urge to hold her forehead. Looking at the gradually approaching hall, a glimmer of light flashed through her long and narrow eyes. The pandemonium was shining brightly. But no matter how beautiful it was, it could never bathe in the sun. Those lights were illusions created by a huge amount of magic power. Black feathers rose, countless flames bloomed into huge fireworks. Thousands of demons rejoiced. Big birds flew across, shuttling back and forth in the fireworks. They raised their heads and chirped, celebrating in their own way. The fireworks grew bigger and bigger, filling the sky. When Helene Vivian saw this scene, only one sentence appeared in her mind: 80 miles below, the Yellow Springs blue sky, the flowers of the other shore bloom. Slap! She was thrown to the ground by the demonic beast like a package. Fortunately, the ground was covered with a wine-red carpet, so it did not hurt when she fell. Instead, it was very soft. Along with her, the two girls were also thrown to the ground. The girl in purple had an indescribable expression on her face. On the other hand, the one called Xiao Kuei seemed to be very happy. The smile on her face was very obvious. She crossed her arms and looked down at Helene Vivian on the ground. Her thin lips had a mocking expression. Sister and I, look at her. Did she become stupid from the fall? Or is she scared stiff? Xiao Kuei. The young lady in purple turned her head around and glanced at her warningly. However, it wasn't very sincere. After all, Wei Wei was merely a stranger to her. She'd only take care of her a bit when she was able to take care of her. Helene Vivian could see through the thoughts of these two girls. They were probably born in noble families. One of them was better than the other, but there was no difference. In their eyes, she was probably a coward who was born in a bad family. Chapter 569. Helene Vivian supported herself with one hand on the ground, and the corner of her mouth that was hidden under her long hair curved upwards. She did not argue with Xiao Kuei, and only brushed her clothes with a calm expression. She was so quiet that it was easy to miss. Xiao Kuei saw that she did not resist, and suddenly felt that it was meaningless. She turned around and said excitedly, "Sister and we will see the king in a while, and he will definitely make you stay. Then the problem that the tribe leaders are worried about will be solved." As she spoke, she glanced at Hellion Wei Wei again, as if she was looking at a servant. "But you must be careful of a certain someone. Of all the times to appear, why did he have to wait until the sacrificial ceremony? He obviously has something in mind." Hellion Vivian did not care about what she meant, and tried to summon Yuan Ming. Just like what Fire Qilin said, it was useless. Yuan Ming was not here, and Hellion Vivian did not know much about the demon world, so she just lowered her eyes and touched the red string on her wrist. "No matter what, this string must not be broken. Hey, you, stand behind me." Xiao Kuei sneered, "Do you know the rules? Do you know that if it wasn't for someone wanting to see Sister and you wouldn't even have the chance to come to the pandemonium, and you still have the wishful thinking that you will be chosen? What a joke. Let me give you a piece of advice. If I were you, I would say something nice to Sister and right now. Maybe you will be treated gently by the king and be rewarded to his subordinates. Otherwise, you will die a horrible death later." Hellion Vivian looked at her indifferently. "That's because your Sister and is powerful. What does it have to do with you? I think you are the one who wants to use your Sister and to climb up, right? Who is your target? That king. You. Hellion Wei Wei's words exposed the most embarrassing part of Xiao Kuei's heart. She did have her own plans for this trip, but she still had to put up with elder Sister and on the surface. Hellion Vivian did not have the interest to argue with her, and what she needed to do now was to find the soul fragment of His Highness. Just as she lowered her head in thought, the stone door in front of her was pushed open by a red-haired man. The man's lips curled into a sinister smile. This time, Wang Ink should like the prey. "Boss, you really have a good eye." The demonic beast knelt down respectfully with its paws. One of them was seen by King Jing when he went to the human world. "Then bring them in." The man let out a long sigh. "His Majesty hasn't been in a good mood recently. Tell them to be careful. You know that His Majesty hates being touched the most." The magical beast hurriedly said, "Boss, don't worry. These 3 people know the rules very well." "Very good, follow me," the man said. The entire stone door seemed to have a reaction as it rose high up in the air. At this moment, the 10,000 Demons Hall finally revealed its true form. The floating stone palace was filled with blooming roses. Compared to the carnival that he had imagined, this place had a classical tranquility. A simple and elegant fragrance filled the air, and a thick fog surrounded it. It was prosperous yet gloomy, just like a legendary ancient castle. In the magnificent hall, a man sat on the throne with his legs slightly crossed. He was dressed very casually, and the collar of his long robe was torn open. A fur cape was beside him, and he wore a black thumb ring on his ivory index finger. His fingers were very slender, and he seemed to be a little bored. He was supporting the side of his face, and his posture was elegant and noble. This kind of oppressive nonchalance, or it could be said that it was extremely cold and luxurious. It made people unable to help but keep quiet out of fear, but at the same time, it was filled with a kind of trance. The man led the people in. The handsome demons stopped their entertainment and looked towards Hellion Vivian and the others. The corners of their mouths were curved, and all of them were interested in the food. As for the man sitting on the throne, he only raised his eyebrows slightly. His legs changed into a lazy posture, but it gave people an indescribable sense of evil. "Master, these are the women you saw in the human world last time." The man in black smiled. "There are a total of 3, and I brought them all to you." The man's slender fingers knocked twice on the cup, and his voice was calm, meddlesome. "Master, there should be another woman on your bed," the man in black said seriously. The man turned his face sideways, and there was no sign of happiness or anger on his noble face. At this time, the woman in purple opened her mouth. Other than the trembling in her voice, she was not as panicked as Xiao Kuei. The person you saw in the exorcist temple last time was me. The two of them were implicated by me. Whatever you want to do, just do it to me. At this moment, the man lifted his eyelids and looked at her. However, those long and narrow eyes were still indifferent and without the slightest ripple of emotion. The man in black thought that he was satisfied, so he waved his hand and said, "Take her away first and clean her up." "Yes." The earth beast bowed its head respectfully, held the woman in purple in its mouth, and took her out. Xiao Kuei was so scared that she shouted, "Sister and I. Where are you taking elder sister and I?" As if the noise annoyed the man, he said impatiently, "Take the remaining two. Let's see which one of you is interested. Take her away now." Hellion Wei Wei originally lowered her eyes and quietly listened. She also didn't intend to compete with them for the king's favor. Now that she heard that this person wanted to get rid of her, she didn't even lift her head and opened her mouth. "Wait a moment." Her tone was very light, and her voice was cold to begin with, so it was inevitable that it would give people a commanding tone. With these 3 words, all the demons looked in the direction of Hellion Vivian. Every demon's eyes were filled with astonishment. They had never seen a human dare to be so presumptuous towards their king. Look at her skin color. I dare to bet that her blood must be very delicious. Hey, that's not the main point. The main point is, did you see her attitude just now? She seems very arrogant. Who cares about her? It's fine as long as it's delicious. Idiot. Do you think the king will let her off if she treats him like this? Hellion Wei Wei listened to the conversation beside her ear. She really wanted to ask how she treated their king. She only said one sentence, and these demons began to chatter endlessly, and then the man on the throne spoke again, but this time, the corners of his mouth seemed to curl up. It was definitely not a kind smile. The evil aura that rushed over made the entire magnificent hall so quiet that one could hear a pin drop. The demons all swallowed their saliva. Chapter 570. And then Hellion Vivian raised her head as she spoke. She thought that since they were going to talk about conditions, they had to look into each other's eyes to be sincere. However, the moment she raised her head, her mind went blank. Beligaju was sitting on the throne. In fact, Hellion Vivian was no longer sure if that person was him. His head was tilted to the side. His jet black hair spread across the ground. It was beautiful and beautiful. He was surrounded by a group of women. They raised their necks and stuck to his throne like moths to a flame. He was high up in the air, looking at her from a distance through the crowd. His incomparably deep eyes were filled with a shocking evil. It was as if one would be sucked in if they looked at him any longer. It was like a mandala blooming in the middle of the night, emitting a beauty that could make people fall. She couldn't feel any human warmth from his body. Those thin lips that were smiling yet not smiling had a bloodthirsty taste to them. However, Hellion Vivian didn't think anything of it. The strange thing was that the scene of him lying down in front of her while covered in blood kept echoing in her mind. She had already said that she would rather he become a demon so that he could live well in this world. As a result, a certain highness that made people want to drag him over and beat him up was much more pleasing to the eye. And then what? Xiao Kuei roared at her, "Don't speak nonsense. I don't want to die with you." Hellion Vivian smiled and ignored Xiao Kuei in front of her. Instead, she didn't fear the threatening gazes above her. She walked over to the man on the throne with her slender legs, step by step. She gave off the aura of an irresistible queen. The demons sucked in a breath and looked at each other. They all had one thought, and that was that this woman was definitely. She was dead. Helene Vivian didn't stop her footsteps because of the cries around her. She was originally very tall, and the most beautiful part of her was her pair of legs. In addition, her skin was as white as snow, and under her high eyebrows was a pair of charming phoenix eyes. Her walking posture was very languid, and her right hand was playing with a silver knife. The corner of her mouth was curved into a smile, and her long chestnut-colored curly hair was evenly spread across her small white face. On her finger was a glittering silver ring. Like a character who walked out of a comic, she approached Bailey Jiaju step by step. The most indifferent one was Baligaju. He only sat there arrogantly, revealing very sharp teeth. There was a trace of blood at the corner of his mouth, giving off a seductive aura of abstinence. When Helene Vivian walked closer, he finally smiled, but that smile didn't reach his eyes. Just when everyone's thought their king couldn't help but kill her, they didn't expect that Helene Vivian's first. She leaned over to him, to kiss him on the lips, to kiss him. In just a moment, everyone's eyes widened. Even the self-proclaimed calmest man in black was stunned. He stared blankly at this scene and shook his head vigorously. Master will definitely kill her. Definitely. Oh. It had never seen such a reckless human before. Let him think, what happened to the witch who tried to get close to Master? She was directly torn into pieces. The man in black held up his long red hair. He really didn't want to see that scene again. The air in the hall seemed to be stagnant. No one dared to say a word. Only Bailey Jiaju's dark eyes narrowed fiercely for a moment. Then, he laughed. That kind of laughter was very forceful, and with a hint of evil. Helene Vivian obviously knew what kind of temper he had. He probably couldn't wait to pick up the things next to him and chop her to death. However, she couldn't care less. When it was necessary, she had to announce that she owned the copyright. But Helene Vivian also knew that she couldn't go too far. Just as she was about to take back her hand, the other party suddenly pressed down on the back of her head. His thin lips were on her, but he didn't kiss her. He just laughed coldly. The familiar cold sandalwood scent lingered at the tip of her nose. Helene Vivian knew that at this time, she had to appease him. She smiled at him, then I want to say, I like you. Why don't you come with me? Seeing you, this king understands the two words that you humans often say. The man emptied a hand and gently stroked her slender neck. Helene Vivian never thought that his attitude would be so good. She immediately became happy. What two words? Courting death. Baligaju turned his face to the side with an evil smile. His voice slowly slid past her ear. Helene Vivian paused. She thought that this person was really good. Even after changing personalities, he still had such a poisonous tongue. Baligaju looked at her. His gaze seemed to be thinking about how he should deal with her later. In the end, he looked at the black-clothed man beside him with a smile that wasn't a smile and said, Chilin, wash her clean and put her in the cage you used to live in. She is such a cute little thing, so it's best to slowly torture her. Chilin. Helene Vivian turned her head and met the black-clothed man's gaze. This person was actually the Fire Chilin. She seemed to have never seen the Fire Chilin in human form before. No wonder the Fire Chilin said that once she stayed in this world, Baligaju would never wake up. Because the so-called fragment was a part of Baligaju's past. If she stayed in the past, there wouldn't be a person in the future. Compared to Helene Vivian, who was deep in thought, all the women around her, whether they were demons or Xiaokue who came from the human world, had eyes full of jealousy. Why was it her? A woman who came from who knows where. They couldn't even feel any spiritual energy from her body. Moreover, wasn't this kind of unreserved woman the most hated by the king? Schwa, schwa, schwa. Countless eyes shot towards Hellion Vivian. The other side was like an insulator. When Beligaju said the word Chelan, she was a bit stunned. What? You don't like the place this king arranged for you? Beligaju smiled again, bringing out an elegant and evil aura. Hellion Vivian was thinking about something, so she subconsciously replied, No, I just want to know if you can use a more expensive lock when you lock me up. That way, I'll feel better. Beligaju, who originally thought he would hear a rejection, slightly paused his fingers. Then his lips curled into a smile. All right, you can rest assured. This king will treat good prey with the best food. When he was bored of raising them, he would kill them. Then can you go with me in the future? Hellion Vivian asked very seriously. Beligaju felt that this little thing in front of him was not annoying at all. She also tasted pretty good. Perhaps he could hug her to sleep tonight. Oh. Chapter 571. Just like that, the pandemonium ushered in the strangest day. What shocked them the most was that the king, who had not been interested in anything for 1,000 years, actually locked a human in his most commonly used cage. This could definitely be considered a major event. Xiao Kuei, who thought that she was pretty, kowtowed to the ground more than 10 times to obtain the right to accompany the pink-clothed woman instead of being sucked by the demon. She had a feeling that all of this was the doing of that woman who came out of nowhere. Otherwise, with her beauty, how could the king not like her? The more Xiao Kuei thought about it, the angrier she became. Once she was in front of the pink-clothed woman, she said indignantly, Sister and I, you don't know how shameless that woman is. She actually kissed the king in front of so many people. A woman like that deserves to be dragged to a pig cage. She kissed him. The pink-clothed woman was stunned, and her expression was a little dazed. He actually allowed her to kiss him. Xiao Kuei snorted coldly, Isn't it because that woman is too shameless? But don't worry, Sister Kuei, the king has already ordered people to lock her in a cage and is planning to slowly torture her. Locked in a cage? The pink-clothed woman heard and frowned. Will she be in danger? Xiao Kuei did not care. Sister and I, you're too kind. Why do you care what she did? She only has herself to blame. Sister and I, you're the youngest exorcist. This time, the king has chosen you in the human world because you're different from the rest. But after all, we're in the pandemonium and can't even take care of ourselves. It's better not to meddle. You're right. The pink-clothed woman sighed. It's all up to her luck. Night, deep in the pandemonium. With a clang, the fire Chelan pushed open the iron cage and said to Hellion Vivian, Miss Vivian, you'll be staying here from now on. The king is a person who loves cleanliness. He doesn't like the smell of his prey. Next to you is the bathroom. Every day before you go to bed, I'll ask someone to let you out and help you bathe. Now, I'll ask someone to bring you to wash up first. Hellion Vivian didn't refuse. Even though she was anxious to bring Beligaju back, she also knew that in this situation, Beligaju might not have the patience to listen to her. After all, he didn't know her yet. Hellion Vivian didn't forget the way he looked at her in the main hall. It was filled with coldness toward strangers. Although it was playful, it lacked the familiar gentleness from before. When Hellion Vivian thought of this, her heart ached, but she lowered her head and smiled. Take your time. Hellion Vivian immersed herself in the tub so that she could calm down. After she finished bathing and came out with a towel, she saw that the originally dark hall was lit up. There seemed to be a slight noise. Hellion Vivian looked to the side and saw a man sitting on a carved mahogany chair in the middle. He was wearing a pure black robe. The robe wasn't fastened, revealing the seductive lines of his abs. His long legs were casually crossed, and he was holding a book in his hand. He was reading with his head lowered. On the coffee table beside him, there was a black chain. It only made people think that his posture was incomparably elegant. But what was with that black chain? Hellion Vivian suddenly had a bad feeling. When Beligaju heard the noise, he had already put down the book in his hand. He raised his eyes and looked at Hellion Vivian. It was still the same face. His skin was fair and clean, and his appearance was noble. However, it was more mischievous than she remembered. There was indifference in his eyes, as if he was very unhappy. He glanced at her. Hellion Vivian thought that he was going to say something, but who knew that he would lower his head again and play with that black chain? Hellion Vivian looked at him. It was obvious that he was not going to enter this life. Beligaju suddenly opened his mouth. There was a bloodthirsty smile at the corner of his mouth. He stared at her with his sharp eyes. You are not from the Exorcist Temple. Yes. Hellion Wei also didn't intend to conceal this point from him. No matter what kind of character this man had, he always couldn't change his inhuman intelligence. She might as well be the one to confess. I was brought here by your magical beast. As for that exorcism temple, I've never even heard of it. As she spoke, she pointed at that black chain. Used to tie me up. Beligaju's eyes were still staring at her, but there was a very gentle smile in them. Do you like it? Hellion Vivian's mouth twitched. No one would like it. This chain is indeed not good enough. Beligaju's eyes were indifferent. It is natural for you to dislike it. I will ask Fire Qilin to give you another one. Hellion Vivian. Was the material of the chain the main point? Was it? Using it to lock her was the main point. No need, give it to me. I will adjust it. After all, Hellion Vivian was a martial artist. When she saw the chain, she knew that it was not a bad thing. After adjusting the order, she did not need Beligaju to do it. She fastened it on her own wrist. Who knew that Beligaju would stand up and look at her arrogantly? A person who knows how to adjust the chain, can she also unlock it? Hellion Vivian was stunned. This man was simply too smart. She straightforwardly admitted, a little. What a surprising prey. Beligaju's voice was so relaxed that it sounded like he was humming a song. Just when Hellion Wei was unable to discern whether he was happy or angry, Bailey Jiaju had already pulled her closer. His fingers fell on her wrist and pinched her palm. Then, with a heart-wrenching coldness, he said, Tell me, shouldn't I break your pair of claws, so that it would be safer? Hellion Vivian's heart suddenly jumped. Then, she slowly opened her mouth. It's not that I want to criticize you, but you better change your way of thinking of casually breaking someone's arm. Oh. Beligaju smiled. His voice was low and deep, making people's ears slightly itch. Don't worry, my skills are very good. I won't hurt you. Hellion Vivian's cheeks turned red. She felt that this conversation was a little strange. It was just like what he said when he did that to her in the past. Beligaju's long eyebrows furrowed. Why are you blushing? Nothing. Hellion Vivian turned her head away. Suddenly, a faint, arrogant smile appeared on his face as he asked in an evil voice, Did you think of something else? Hellion Vivian's face became even hotter, but she quickly understood. With a certain highness's EQ, he would not think in that direction. As expected, Beligaju spoke again. Humans have always been afraid of small things and pain, I know. Hellion Vivian really wanted to say that he knew nothing, but when she saw a certain highness like this, she still wanted to laugh. His EQ was so low. Chapter 572. You'll sleep in the cage today. Beligaju said slowly, I know that this king is very handsome and will always make women have some thoughts they shouldn't have, but I still have to warn you. You're not allowed to sneak up on me on the bed. As a prey, you should act like a prey. Helene Vivian raised her eyebrows. Shouldn't people praise you for being handsome? Isn't it a bit strange to say that you're handsome? Beligaju stopped moving and said indifferently, don't waste time arguing over established facts. Scram back to your cage and tell me if you're hungry. You humans seem to eat a lot. Helene Vivian. What do you mean by you humans seem to eat a lot? I'm not a pig. However, the man's attitude was indeed very cold. It was as if he would chase her out of the pandemonium if she said another word. There was still a difference between this and the person who used to tolerate her in everything. Helene Vivian chuckled at that thought. Don't be silly. Instead of always thinking about the past, why don't you think about how to take down this completely inhumane Beligaju? Fortunately, Helene Vivian's cage was placed on the side of Beligaju's bed. According to Beligaju, domestic prey should be placed where he could see it so that he could play with it at any time. Raise your claws. Beligaju, whose hair was still wet, walked over and bent down to reach out his hand to Helene Vivian in the cage. Helene Vivian slept very comfortably. The blanket in the cage was really warm and thick. She looked up in a daze. What are you doing? Shouldn't a prey say goodnight to its master? Beligaju's lips curled up, but it didn't feel like he was smiling at all. Helene Vivian looked at him and raised her hand. Beligaju was satisfied. He took her hand and squeezed it. Very good. Don't snore when you sleep. I don't like noise around me. Got it. Helene Vivian felt a little helpless when she saw him instructing her, just like how she had instructed her Tibetan Mastiff. Bailey Jiaju stroked her head and was surprised to find that it felt good. He narrowed his eyes and said, also, you can run away, but I'm not sure if I'll kill you directly if I'm in a bad mood. Helene Vivian. Who would dare to run away if you put it that way? All right, come here. Ben Wang will help you take off your clothes. Go to sleep. Beligaju's tone was very light, so light that it made people mistakenly think that he was just talking about eating youtiao for breakfast the next day. Helene Vivian looked up at him. I'm a woman. Men and women shouldn't touch each other. Beligaju lowered his voice. I'll say it again. Come here. No, when it comes to undressing, I'll do it myself. Helene Wei insisted. Bailey Jiaju laughed mockingly and said, it's your ridiculous sense of honor and disgrace that's causing mischief. Helene Vivian. Don't be so racist. Don't worry, Ben Wang isn't interested in you. Beligaju said as he trapped her in a corner of the cage. But it's Ben Wang's pleasure to take off the clothes of his prey. Helene Vivian chuckled. You really have a lot of inhumane interests. How many prey have you taken off their clothes for? None. Beligaju lowered his eyes and pushed her clothes away with his slender fingers. Ben Wang has only shaved the sky-swallowing beast. I think the principle is the same. Helene Vivian. Only you would treat taking off someone's clothes and shaving an animal's fur as the same thing. You don't look too happy. Beligaju's voice deepened. He poked her face with his finger and said in a lecturing tone, you can't show your emotions to your master. Helene Vivian didn't have anything else to say. She could almost see her life as a prey in the future. This won't do. If I want him to go back with me, just being a prey isn't enough. The man's familiar sandalwood scent wafted over. Helene Vivian realized that he had already started to help her take off her clothes. He was really taking off her clothes. There wasn't any emotion on his face. Even his thick eyelashes didn't blink. Other than his movements being a little rusty, it was obvious. His Highness was really treating taking off her clothes as a job. It wasn't that the two of them hadn't been intimate before, but when he slowly took off her clothes like this, Helene Vivian had an indescribable feeling. Her heart started to pound. She could feel the temperature of his fingertips. When the cold touch fell on her skin, it always made her feel a little numb. Finally, she was naked. Helene Vivian took a deep breath and was about to get up. Suddenly, she felt a movement beside her. Beligaju had already pressed her down. His fingers slowly stroked her fair skin. He propped one hand on the side of her head and looked down at her. This sudden action made Helene Vivian's heart skip a beat. He was right above her. His upper body was slanted. The gentle light shone into his eyes, making his eyebrows look even more noble. Under his straight nose, his pale thin lips opened slightly. His voice was deep and magnetic. "Sleep with me tonight. Sleep with me tonight." After Helene Vivian heard this, every inch of her body trembled slightly because of his breath. If he was really interested in her, it should be easier to let him go back. However, Beligaju's next words were, "This prince doesn't like cold things. You're very warm, so hugging you to sleep should be very comfortable." Helene Vivian. So she was also acting as a hug pillow. Her heart raced just now, but it was completely meaningless. In a certain prince's eyes, she was definitely an existence similar to a cat or a dog. They were of different species, so what was there to talk about interests? Helene Vivian let out a long sigh. Sure enough, she was overthinking things. Bailey Jiaju didn't utter a single word as he carried her in his arms and placed his fingers on her smooth back. That posture made it seem as if he was only carrying a quilt in his arms as he slowly closed his eyes. Just like he said, he didn't make any moves on Helene Vivian. Even the way he held her was indescribably elegant and noble. Helene Vivian couldn't sleep. The friction on her back was very obvious. Her face was very close to his chest, so close that she could smell that faint cold breath. Without any other choice, Helene Vivian could only count to sleep. 1 Beligaju, 2 Beligaju, 3 Beligaju, 4. Unexpectedly, at this moment, the man suddenly opened his eyes. His voice was calm and arrogant. "Shouldn't you give your master a kiss before sleeping?" Chapter 573. Helene Vivian blushed. Kissing before sleeping isn't a greeting between a master and their prey. It's something that only couples do. Beligaju lowered his eyes and stared at her for a long while. Helene Vivian thought that he would say something. She didn't expect him to fall back into a light sleep after saying, "I see." Helene Vivian, why was she so nervous just now? Now that she knew that His Highness didn't have any thoughts about her, Helene Vivian's eyes dimmed, and she closed her eyes as well. The man's embrace wasn't warm. Perhaps it was because demons were born with low body temperatures, but being hugged by him made her feel like she was lying in an ice cube. That night, Helene Vivian woke up 2 or 3 times from the cold. Seeing how comfortable he was sleeping, she couldn't bear to push his hand away. She opened her clear eyes and looked at him. Then, she leaned over and kissed the corner of his mouth. When she woke up again, it was because of the noise outside. Helene Vivian had a slender frame to begin with. When she sat up with her lower body propped up, she was undoubtedly the most beautiful. The man beside her was no longer there. Helene Vivian didn't know whether it was day or night because there was no sunlight in the pandemonium. Because there were resplendent and luxurious pearls everywhere, the hall wasn't dark at all. Instead, it was beautifully lit. Helene Vivian was entranced by the sight. She moved her leg, and the chain made a sound. It turned out that while she was asleep, the man had locked the chain that was supposed to be on her leg. Was he planning on not letting her go anywhere? Helene Vivian wasn't an obedient person to begin with. She touched the chain with her fingers and familiarized herself with it for a while. Then, she heard a clang. The chain was undone. She moved her ankle, and her long chestnut hair fell straight to her thighs. Her skin was so fair that it was almost transparent. Standing like this with her back to others would only make people feel that she was very beautiful. When Bailey Jiaju walked in and saw this scene, his good-looking eyebrows raised. He hugged her from behind just like that, his breath hit the back of her ear. You have to wear clothes before eating. Don't let me remind you about this kind of thing a second time. Helene Vivian did not expect him to appear. Her body stiffened, and she felt that this posture was too intimate. But he didn't seem to feel anything. He directly carried her and put her on his lap. His slender fingers pointed to the side. That's your food today. Helene Vivian felt that her entire back was burning up. She didn't look at where Baligaju was pointing at. She just wanted him to let go of her. His body was still covered in frost from the outside. The fur cloak rubbed against her legs, and it was like an electric current had entered her heart, making it impossible for her to focus. Bailey Jiaju saw that she kept her head down, so he simply reached out his hand, pinched her chin, and lifted her face. But in the next moment, the light in his eyes became a lot heavier. He never knew that a human could be so beautiful. Especially her eyes, they seemed to be filled with water. He didn't know why, but the corners of her eyes were red. Inexplicably, Baligaju wanted to see more of her expression. His hands seemed to be guided as they rubbed Helene Vivian's softness. Helene Vivian's body trembled. She opened her mouth and bit her thin lips. Under Baligaju's gaze, her breath became a bit unstable. Baligaju's eyes became darker and darker, but he had enough self-control. The corners of his eyes slightly raised, looking very evil. It seems that you like me to touch you. Helene Vivian knew that he was starting to take advantage of her again. Seeing him take back his hands, she took a handkerchief to wipe them. Her eyes became clearer. Then she smiled. I like you very much. From the beginning, I told you, but it's a pity that you didn't want to go with me. You want to take me to the human world. Baligaju suddenly curved his thin lips, but it was unbelievably cold. Save your stupid tricks. Helene Vivian frowned. Tricks? Did she use any tricks? Don't mention to me about going with you. Otherwise, I won't be able to control myself and won't break your two claws. Baligaju's fingers pinched her wrists. He didn't use much strength, but it made Helene Vivian feel a piercing pain. His eyes dimmed. There was no warmth in his gaze, making Helene Vivian feel as if she was in an ice house. It was so cold that it penetrated her heart. Helene Vivian didn't say anything. It was obvious that she could agree to all of his words, except for this one, she couldn't agree to. But she couldn't understand why he was so against going to the human world. Baligaju saw that she lowered her head and was quiet, so he returned to his usual attitude. Don't you want to look at your food? What food? Only then did Helene Wei look at the place he mentioned earlier. There were a total of 20 steaming meat buns, each of them steaming hot. The corner of her mouth twitched as she looked at them. You mean, you want me to eat these for a day? Did he think she was little 7? Baligaju looked back at her. Is it not enough? Helene Vivian. Quantity isn't the main point. It might not be enough. The sky-swallowing beast eats 60 of them in one meal. Baligaju's voice carried a hint of indifference. But seeing that you are so small, I thought that you would eat less. Helene Vivian, what did he mean by so small? She was already 1.7 meters tall, okay. She was already considered tall among girls. You're comparing me to a divine beast. Is there even a comparison? Who can compare to the sky-swallowing beast, one of the 4 divine beasts? Wait a minute. Helene Vivian narrowed her eyes as if she suddenly thought of something. Was it a coincidence? Why did the sky-swallowing beast also like to eat meat buns? And before coming here, Xiao Bai had mentioned to Yuan Ming that Xiao Qi was very likely to be a divine beast. Could it be that the sky-swallowing beast was Xiao Qi? Helly and Vivian pondered for a moment before asking, "Can I see the sky-swallowing beast?" "No." Belikaju's voice was very calm. However, Wei Wei realized that he didn't seem to want her to ask this kind of question. His defensive nature was indeed very similar to that of a demon without blood. Demons seem to always be like this. They wouldn't trust anyone. But they weren't as ugly as other ghosts. Instead, they wandered in the darkness like gentlemen. They had their own aesthetics and endless pursuit of elegance. Take eating as an example. The souls that they had their eyes on first had to be slowly raised. Only when they were raised to the point where they could eat, would they eat slowly. When Hellion Wei Wei thought of this, she suddenly understood why His Highness had the hobby of locking people in cages. He didn't treat her as a simple prey to be raised. He had treated her as food from the start. Chapter 574. Master, I heard that you slept with that human in your arms for the entire night. In the evening, in the main hall, Fire Qilin spoke in a surprised voice. Belikaju glanced at it without saying a word. Fire Qilin trembled and coughed softly. Master, I have no intention of gossiping about you. I just feel that your body temperature has always been on the cold side. Even I feel cold when I'm beside you. That human was in your arms for the entire night, but she didn't get any problems from the cold. She's really lucky. That's why I let her stay. Bailey Jia Ju nonchalantly put down the skull in his hand. His thin lips slightly parted as he said, "Go and check if she still has any relatives in the human world. Why does she keep trying to make me leave the magical realm?" Fire Qilin frowned. Master's soul power has been unstable recently. Once you leave the demon world, this will be exposed. Is this what the exorcising tribe is planning? We can't be sure if she's from the exorcising tribe. Belikaju stood up with a heavy look in his eyes. However, the exorcising tribe does have the intention to kill me. The sky gradually darkened. Before passing the tea to the lady in pink, he lowered his voice and said, he should have noticed the exorcising tribe's intentions and is now investigating internally. You have to hurry up. The woman who came in with you has an unknown identity. He should be most suspicious of her. Think of a way to get yourself out of this. We'll cooperate with you. The lady in pink bit her lip and looked around. He has always been guarded. If we don't use some extreme methods, we won't be able to get into his good books. Find 2 damned servants to pretend to assassinate him. I'll try to block a sword for him. Assassinate him. The figure paused. I'm afraid he'll crush the sword before it even shows up. I'll look for that woman in a while. He should be here soon. Do it in front of that woman. There's no need to get close to him. It'll be fine as long as I'm the one who's going to pierce him. Is this really going to work? The figure couldn't help but wonder. The woman in pink nodded. Back in the human world, I saved his life. That's why he chose me during the Exorcist tribe's sacrificial ceremony. In some ways, I do treat him differently. Since you're so confident, let's follow the plan. The figure looked at her and said, Ni Feng, you mustn't be soft-hearted. Demons and devils are running rampant in the human world now. If we don't lure this man to the human world when his mana is at its lowest, even the divine exorcism seal won't have any effect on him. In that case, even if all the demons and devils in the world are imprisoned in hell, as long as he doesn't die, we can't be saved. Ni Feng clenched the white handkerchief in her hand and took the tea and snacks. Her eyes widened. I know. Don't worry. Since I've decided to come to the demon world, I won't be soft-hearted anymore. Creak, the door was pushed open and Xiao Kuei walked in excitedly. She didn't notice the extra servant and whispered in Ni Feng's ear, "Sister Ni, let me tell you something. That woman is in trouble now." Of all the things she said, she just had to bring His Majesty to the human world. I guess His Majesty's patience has been worn thin by her. He's sending people to investigate her. If they find out anything, she'll lose her life even if she doesn't die. Ni Feng's eyes flashed. She chuckled and said, "Let's go and see her." She came to the demon world alone without a companion. I'm afraid she wants to go out too. She didn't want to see anyone die. It would be best if she could send her away. Now, she needed to make use of this Hellion Vivian. However, she couldn't let her distract Beligaju too much. Xiao Kuei curled her lips and smiled. "Alright, let's let that country bumpkin know the difference between us." Ni Feng didn't say anything this time. The two of them walked toward the place where Hellion Vivian was locked up. His Highness was very democratic when it came to raising his prey. He even set a time for Hellion Vivian to get some fresh air. There was a period of time when Hellion Wei Wei was able to move the person and the cage outside to enjoy the scenery. However, Hellion Vivian still had to stay in the cage. Her range of movement was limited. This was nothing to her. However, she was a little anxious about how to bring His Highness back. Hellion Vivian leaned against the cage and looked at the scene in the pandemonium. Her mind was a little scattered. "Sister Ni, you see, some people are really easy to satisfy. Even if you give her a cage, she can still sleep well. She doesn't have any shame at all." Xiao Kuei's disgusted voice came from the left. Hellion Vivian looked at her amusedly. She lazily took a piece of pastry and put it in her mouth, as if she didn't care about her at all. What Xiao Kuei couldn't stand was her attitude. She was obviously a half-baked product. If it wasn't for the magical beast picking her up, she probably wouldn't even have the qualifications to be a sacrifice. She was even worse than a pig or a dog. She didn't even have the slightest bit of respect when she looked at them. Such a person was really infuriating. "Xiao Kuei, what did I tell you before we came?" Ni Feng looked like she had a headache. She turned around and scolded Xiao Kuei softly, "Be polite to people." Xiao Kuei was polite this time. However, her eyes were still full of contempt for Hellion Vivian. "Sister Ni came to see you out of kindness. If you give up your wishful thinking, we can beg the king to let you go. Now that Sister Ni and I have been arranged to stay in the inner palace, you should understand the difference between how the king treats Sister Ni and how he treats you. Sister Ni has saved the king before. The king has always doted on her. I advise you to be tactful. When it's time to give in, give in. Don't embarrass yourself too much." Hellion Vivian really didn't know enough about the current Beligaju. Listening to Xiao Kuei's words, she felt like her heart was bitten by a snake. It was very painful. It was not that she believed her words, but she knew that no matter how that person changed, he would treat the person who saved him differently. Xiao Kuei caught a glimpse of the sadness that flashed across Hellion Vivian's face. Xiao Kuei continued, "I think you probably don't know." This time, the king nodded his head and agreed to sacrifice only Sister Ni. As the descendant of the exorcising tribe, Sister Ni is of noble birth and is a good match for the king. What about you? Other than being thick-skinned, what else do you have? The descendant of the exorcising tribe. Hellion Wei Wei narrowed her eyes. She remembered that Yuan Ming had mentioned to her at the White Academy that the reason why the primordial spirit of the demon king who ruled the world was shattered and disappeared from the world was because of a woman from the exorcising tribe. Chapter 575. Helene Vivian lowered her gaze slightly. Although she was unwilling to admit it, she did have a love rival. Sister Ni, the descendant of the exorcising tribe. Could she be an iPhone? Helene Vivian tilted her head and looked at the girl in pink again. Everything made sense now. No wonder Yuan Ming kept saying that there was something wrong with the soul in her body. It turned out that the person who had been trying to regain her body was not the dead Helene Vivian. It was an iPhone, who had been lurking in Helene Vivian's body for a long time, preparing to take over her body when the time was right. An iPhone wanted to return to the human world, not only to prevent the divine exorcism seal from being destroyed, but also because she still had feelings for His Highness. Helene Wei did not understand. Since he liked her, why could he just watch as that person's soul gathered and dispersed? She only knew that things were getting more and more complicated. She had to solve it as soon as possible and bring His Highness back. An iPhone saw that Helene Vivian did not say anything, so she opened her mouth and looked at her. You don't want to be chained up like this, right? Who said I don't want to? Helene Vivian smiled slightly. It's good to have food and drink. An iPhone chuckled. You're eating and drinking now, but that's because demons need time to nurture souls. Once he's bored of you, it'll be enough time, and you'll be dead. He's always been impatient with humans. An iPhone was indeed describing Helene Vivian's current situation. She was indeed smart. She said calmly, if you want to leave, I can help you. At least I can save your life and send you back to the human world safely. If you stay, I won't be able to take care of you. The exorcising tribe will not leave you in the lurch, but we can't mess things up because of your life. Think about it carefully and give me an answer tomorrow. No need, I can give you an answer now. Helene Vivian stood up. Her slender figure looked at an iPhone with a smile on her thin lips. I won't leave. Hearing this, an iPhone frowned. She had never met such an uncooperative person. Xiao Kuei was furious. Sister Ni, what did I say? This woman is shameless. She just wants to take your position as queen. Who doesn't know that the king picked her here because he wants to be the queen? How shameless. Schwa. There was a loud noise. Xiao Kuei could only watch as a thin silver knife slit across her cheek. The pain made her so angry that she was about to explode. You woman, how dare you attack me? Helene Vivian played with the silver knife in her hand and smiled faintly. What's wrong with attacking you? You. Xiao Kuei bared her fangs and brandished her claws, wanting to rush over. An iPhone stopped her, turned around and said to Helene Wei, it's impossible for you to be the queen. I'm not interested in becoming a queen at all, Helene Vivian said lazily. You don't have to warn me again and again. An iPhone smirked. It seems that you don't plan to stay. Helene Wei looked at an iPhone. She could basically guess what the other party was thinking. She did not want an iPhone to be an obstacle to her. Time was limited, she could not waste it on these things. Her thin lips curled up, but she did not mean what she said, of course. An iPhone's eyes widened when she heard this. She looked behind Helene Vivian. My king. Helene Wei shuddered as she clearly felt the coldness coming from behind her. That kind of icy coldness made her heart tremble along with it. Beligaju had a fur cloak draped over his arm. The fur was made of the best fox fur and it was very warm. When he first saw the fur cloak, he thought of the prey he had just subdued. She would definitely like it if it was given to her. He could tell that she liked anything expensive. She should be happy when she saw this fur cloak. Everyone who approached him was more or less up to something. He couldn't understand this prey. He knew that she had woken up from the cold at night and thought that she would let go of him. He didn't expect her to hug his waist and sleep the whole night. She even kissed him secretly without his permission. He understood the ridiculous shame of humans. He didn't blame this little prey for her behavior in consideration of her feelings. He thought that he was a competent master. But she had never thought of staying by his side. Ha, how ironic. Beligaju turned his face sideways. The temperature around him suddenly dropped to the extreme. Hellion Vivian knew that he had heard everything she said just now. According to his personality, he would definitely not be happy after hearing such words. He might even ignore her. No matter what, she had to solve it. Hellion Vivian took a deep breath and slowly turned her head. Bailey Jiaju stood behind her. His eyes were devoid of warmth, like an invisible ice knife, piercing through her heart. You. Hellion Vivian wanted to say, "Let me explain." But when she moved, she discovered that she was still locked in the cage. She could only hear the clanging sounds. It was obvious that Beligaju didn't want to listen to her explanation. His eyes moved away from her, coldness seeping out from his voice. Qilin, when did a prey have the right to appear in the Light Palace? Fire Qilin, it was you who said that you were afraid that the new pet would be too bored and let her come out for some fresh air. Because of this, both it and the Azure Dragon were extremely jealous. Because when you raised us, you never let us out for some fresh air. It was already good enough that you didn't run out of food. But the Fire Qilin did not have the guts to provoke its master. It immediately lowered its head. It's my fault. I shouldn't have let people move the cage here. I'll let them move it back. Bailey Jiaju did not speak, his expression was full of alienation. Hellion Wei Wei felt the cage under her feet being lifted up. She knew that if she didn't defend herself at this time, she was afraid that she wouldn't have another chance in the future. Just as she was about to open her mouth, she saw a black fog suddenly rising behind him. Before she could say the words, "Be careful," someone had already pounced over and blocked Beligaju's back. She covered her bleeding abdomen with her fingers and her small face turned pale. It was Feng. She lifted her small face, her eyes seemed to only have Beligaju left. "Are you okay?" Beligaju paused. His dark eyes narrowed and the black fog immediately revealed its original form, lying on the ground in pain. Fire Qilin instantly transformed. It raised its leg and wanted to stomp the man in black to death. "Keep him." Beligaju gave the order. His eyes had completely lost their warmth. He looked at Feng again. Feng smiled weakly at him. Hellion Vivian looked at this scene and suddenly felt a little helpless. She looked mockingly at the iron chains that she had just broken free from. Chapter 576. Her actions were too slow after all. Or was it because someone else was too fast? Even at this time, Hellion Vivian was still rational, but at the same time, she realized that she was not as strong as she thought. She watched as Feng was escorted into the inner hall by the crowd. Beligaju also strolled away. Hellion Vivian wanted to follow him. She no longer wanted to defend herself, but wanted to warn Beligaju to be careful. As soon as the black fog rose, Feng rushed over. In terms of time, this was impossible. Unless Feng already knew that there would be someone behind Beligaju. Hellion Vivian did not know what was wrong with her, but at this time, her thoughts were clearer. It was probably because she understood the development of the whole situation from the beginning, otherwise, she would not have realized that there was something wrong. Because everything was arranged so flawlessly, there was not a single flaw. The more it was like this, the more worried Hellion Vivian was. She kept calling the title of king. However, he seemed to be extremely annoyed. He did not even turn his head, and his indifferent figure soon disappeared into the hall. Hellion Vivian finally got all the locks done, but the cage and the magical beast in front of her did not seem to have any intention of letting her pass. At this moment, Hellion Vivian clenched her fist and slammed it on the side. It was as if only the pain could keep her calm. She finally understood what it meant to be one step behind others. That feeling was a feeling of helplessness that could not be changed no matter how hard one tried. What should she do? What should she do if she wrote it down? There was not enough time to begin with. What else could she do to make Beligaju, who was a complete stranger to her, go back with her? For the second time, Hellion Vivian tasted what it meant to be at a loss. The first time was when she found out that her father was cheating on her. Hellion Vivian reached out to support her forehead. She could not give up like this. Since she was able to chase after him at the White Academy. But here, she could do it too. Wasn't she just a slightly smarter love rival? She was a domineering CEO. She would study how to woo people later. Tomorrow, she would take down Beligaju. In the inner palace, Fong was lying on the bed with a pale face. Her eyes were fixed on the indifferent man not far away. Although he didn't carry her back personally. But things were already going according to her plan. Then, someone would push all the blame onto Hellion Vivian. Everything fell into place. Fong was still in pain. She gripped the blanket tightly. She had no choice but to come up with such a plan. It was because she was anxious. Everything had been going smoothly, but for some reason, Hellion Vivian had appeared out of nowhere. For the sake of the world, she had no choice but to do so. Does it hurt? The man's voice was like poison mixed with honey, extremely pleasant to the ears, but deadly. Fong could not see through his thoughts because his eyes were too cold. She only said, "It hurts." She saw him smile, but there was no warmth in that smile, only his etiquette in front of others. Once again, she saw that man's indifference to everyone. She originally thought that she was the only one who could see his elegance. Later, she found out that it was just a trait of his as a demon. He was like that to everyone, just like now, he had not even touched her. However, as long as she could talk to him, it was an improvement. She believed that she had pulled him twice in a row. Once by accident, and once deliberately. She should make sure that he would never forget her again. After that, Beligaju did not say anything else. He left many people to take care of Fong and walked out of the room, returning to the Divine Light Basilica. Fire Qilin followed behind him respectfully. When it saw his cold eyes glancing in the direction just now, it immediately said, "Master, don't worry. There won't be any prey coming in and out of the Divine Light Basilica again, unless she willingly becomes your mount one day." Beligaju's gaze slowly turned toward it, his eyes were extremely cold. The surrounding air pressure seemed to have become very low all of a sudden. Fire Qilin froze and did not dare to breathe. Why was Master angry all of a sudden? "From today onwards, your dinner will start to increase in portion." Bailey Jiaju smiled. Fire Qilin, who was very familiar with him, definitely did not think that this was a good thing. It immediately said, "Master, my dinner is very good now. There's no need to increase the amount, there's really no need to increase the amount. You've worked so hard for me, how can I not reward you?" Beligaju said slowly, "I think you're tired of eating beef, so I might as well change it up. Every night, 100 kilograms of white radish, don't come to see me if you can't finish it. You let just anyone into the Divine Light Basilica, I have to teach you a lesson." Fire Qilin was speechless. He was venting his anger. He was definitely venting his anger. In order to prevent its master from getting even angrier, Fire Qilin's claws quietly touched the fur coat on the sandalwood table, intending to get rid of it in private. It did not expect to be caught red-handed by Beligaju. His gaze was very cold. Fire Qilin straightened its back and said, Master, Lady Ni saved you. It's inevitable that she'll feel cold after losing too much blood. This coat looks very thick, it'll come in handy. You've become smarter. Beligaju curved his thin lips into a faint smile. Fire Qilin thought that this sounded like a compliment, but why did it feel like something was wrong? Add another 10 kilograms of white radish for dinner. Beligaju sneered. When he looked at the coat, his eyes turned cold. A reward for your intelligence. Fire Qilin cried. How could it not accept such a reward? Bailey Jiaju opened his mouth again, without the slightest ripple in his expression. Add a few more quilts for the injured woman. Yes. Fire Qilin breathed a sigh of relief. It was finally back to normal. Phew, the news of Ni Feng blocking a sword for Beligaju quickly spread throughout the demon world. Although demons had no humanity, they were inexplicably righteous. When they saw Ni Feng doing such a thing, they began to accept her from the bottom of their hearts. Hellion Vivian was not in a good situation. Probably because all the demonic beasts ran to Ni Feng's place to serve her, her dinner was considered to be cut off. Occasionally, she would hear the sound of footsteps passing by. They were all talking about how important Lady Ni was in the inner palace. Hellion Vivian looked at the wound on the back of her hand and felt a little tired. It felt like something was pressing down on her chest, making it hard for her to breathe. The pandemonium would be especially cold at night. After all, Hellion Wei Wei was a human being. Coupled with the fact that she had not eaten dinner and her body was weak, she could not resist her body's instinct. She vaguely remembered the way Bailey Jiaju used to feed her in the past. She did not know how she fell asleep. Her whole body was curled up in the cage, like an injured little fox, exposing her most vulnerable part. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.